Copyright 2015 by Samantha Price. All rights reserved. Chapter 1. Yea, though I walk through the valley, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me, of the shadow of death. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Psalm chapter 23 verse 4. Daddy, young Bailey cried as he was surrounded in darkness. The boy's little fists battered helplessly against the solid oak door that kept him trapped. Between his cries for help, Bailey could just make out faint murmurs of sound through the thick wooden barrier. Feeling his lungs burn and his eyes sting, he fell silent. Young Bailey waited in fear as the clicking began. The slow, gradual clicking that signaled that the door would soon be pulled open. The enveloping darkness faded, giving way to light that flooded the cupboard. He closed his eyes from the harsh light that stung his eyes. The adult Bailey sprang into an upright position and opened his eyes. Taking a sharp breath, Bailey adjusted to the realization that he was in the Amish community. He rested his weary head in his hands, silently wondering when all of this would be over. He would have to do something about these nightmares before he married Sylvie, and he could not waste another day thinking of doing so. The time to act was now. The night was dark with still no hint of morning sun. Bailey closed his eyes and tried to get some more sleep before the early morning milking of the cows. Bailey was staying with Jack's family. Requirements after joining the Amish was that he stay with a family and learn their ways. Jack and Pamela Fuller had offered for Bailey to stay on their farm with them and their 5 small boys. Jack had a dairy farm, which Bailey quickly learned meant a lot of hard work and early mornings. Bailey had offered to help Jack with the farm work. His body was now weary, but his mind worked overtime. Would he have to go back to the psychiatrist? Was that the answer to rid him of his terrors? After a moment, Bailey laid his head back into his pillow, and to alleviate his tense body, he imagined waking up with his bride-to-be. It had to be around 2 or 3 in the morning, and as soon as the night sky began to lighten, it would be time to wake and milk the cows, so many cows. Bailey had no idea how Jack did it year after year. The only thing that got Bailey through helping out on the farm was the knowledge that it was merely a temporary situation. Bailey heard a noise downstairs and sat on the edge of his bed. The fear of danger drawing closer hurried Bailey to his feet, urging him to investigate. He padded barefoot across his bedroom floor, crept across the hallway and descended the staircase. Squinting into the darkness, Bailey slowly inched forward, his nerves keeping him aware of every single sound that slipped through the silence. He searched the whole of the darkness downstairs. There was no danger, nothing that could have made those sounds. Maybe the sounds had been in his imagination. When he found himself in the kitchen, Bailey approached the sink. Feeling dry-mouthed from the adrenaline, he was eager for a drink. While he filled a glass with water, he noticed a flicker of movement at the edge of his peripheral vision, which caused his fear to spike once more. He wanted to face the person, to turn and command the figure of his nightmares to cease, but he froze, unable to move. Watching the faint outline of the shadow slink closer, it wasn't until he felt the hand clamp down on his shoulder that Bailey turned sharply. His gaze met Jack's. The look of apprehension remained heavily on his features, until the realization slowly seeped in that this was no nightmare. Bailey's years of training in self-defense had failed him, or Jack would have been down on the floor with Bailey's arm around his neck ready to snap it in 2 seconds flat. "Jack," Bailey whispered. "Sorry. Are you okay?" Jack quickly responded, clearly alarmed by his friend's expression. "Yeah." As words failed him, Bailey's gaze slid down towards the half-full glass in his hand. "I just needed a drink." Raising the glass to his lips, he drank the lot in one large gulp. Shooting Bailey a questioning look, Jack gave a brief nod of acknowledgement before returning upstairs. Left alone once again, Bailey placed the glass on the sink and headed to the yard outside. The cold night breeze immediately bit into his skin, causing him to shudder involuntarily. The air was bitter, condensing his breath into vapor trails that spilled from his lips with each exhalation. As cold as it was outside, it was also quiet, the 2 things Bailey needed right now. His mind still swirled between lethargy and deep concern. He needed to clear his head, and outside amidst the midnight chill he felt was the place to do exactly that. However, with the passing of each minute, Bailey felt the warmth fall further from his body. Now he would appreciate the coziness of his bed. He returned into the house and made his way up the stairs. Resting his head upon the comfort of his pillow, Bailey found that sleep came quickly, but it did not come peacefully. Chapter 2. There is no fear in love, but perfect love casteth out fear, because fear hath torment. He that feareth is not made perfect in love. 1 John chapter 4 verse 18. The next morning Bailey awoke still plagued with tiredness, a result of his nightmare-filled slumber. He pulled a loose-fitting shirt over his torso and headed downstairs with a big breakfast on his mind. Upon entering the kitchen, Bailey saw that Jack and his kids had obviously been awake for some time. "Good afternoon, Bailey. Grab yourself some coffee, you look like you haven't slept a wink." Bailey laughed. "Afternoon. It can't even be 6 o'clock in the morning." Jack chuckled while Bailey grabbed a mug from the countertop, filled the mug with hot coffee and sat at the kitchen table. Bailey offered Jack a thankful nod and a smile when he brought him a plate of breakfast. "Would you mind helping me fix some machinery in the barn later this afternoon, after you come back from being with Sylvie?" Jack asked as he moved towards the oven. "Sure. Before that, I'll take Pamela and the children to visit my mother at her store in town. We'll only be an hour or two." Jack playfully ruffled his son's hair each in turn, gaining a series of giggles in return. Taking a seat at the table, Jack made a start on his breakfast. After a morning spent milking the cows and other associated chores, Bailey washed up and sorted through his clothes trying to find something nice to wear for his date with Sylvie. He might not have a job, but he told himself he had a new start, and along with that would come a new job in time. Until then, job or no job, he would try and look his best for Sylvie. She always looked so nice. As he dressed, there was a knock on his door. "Come in." Jack strolled in wearing a smile as he inspected Bailey's efforts. "You're going all out for Sylvie, I see." "She's a wonderbar lady, Jack. I have a good friend to take me in, and a fine woman to take me on. Least I can do is to appreciate my good fortune and dress as though I deserved it." "You'd give the shirt off your back if someone needed it more than you." Jack chuckled. Bailey thought about that and shrugged. Any good Christian would, but not everyone was a good Christian. He'd learned that the hard way. "Have a great day, you both deserve it," Jack said, slapping his back lightly. Bailey laughed softly, straightened his tie and brushed down his trousers. Jack went to leave Bailey and then turned in the doorway. "Oh wait, you are taking the buggy, aren't you?" "I plan to get there on these 2 legs," Bailey said. "Of course you'll take the horse and buggy." "I meant for you to take the buggy. You can use it at any time if I'm not using it, as long as the poor horse doesn't go too far in any one day. Anyway, can't have you covered in dust before you even arrive, seeing you're going to so much trouble." Bailey had assumed he'd walk the 4 miles to her house. "Are you sure? That's very generous of you. Won't you need it today?" "Got no place to be until later this afternoon." "You take it." He raised his hand, there would be no arguing with him. "I'll go hitch the buggy while you finish up making yourself pretty." Bailey laughed and picked up something to throw at Jack, but he was too late. Jack had ducked away and was already making his way down the hall. Now he would be able to take Sylvie on a buggy ride, most fitting for their date. Jack had been so good to him, he wondered if he would ever be able to pay him back, although Jack would never expect to be paid back for his kindness. Bailey had come to learn that the Amish were kind and good-hearted. They were a community, as everyone kept telling him, more than a community. They were a large family. When Bailey arrived at Sylvie's house, Sylvie stepped out onto her porch. She wore a yellow cotton dress with her usual over-apron, and her long buttermilk hair was caught up under her prayer cap. As she came closer, Bailey looked into her sky-blue eyes, then marveled that she was the epitome of a summer's day, eyes blue like the sky and her dress and hair golden yellow like the sun. "This Jack's buggy?" She jumped up without needing Bailey's help, though he'd offered, so he returned to his seat and grabbed hold of the reins. "Yeah. Hello." Bailey smiled at her sweetly. "Hello," she replied as she felt her stomach fill with butterflies. They sat side by side for a moment, silently taking in the presence of each other. Then Sylvie smiled at him, and Bailey thought that her face outshone the sun. "Look at you, all fully Amish and driving a buggy. I'm so happy you're here, Bailey." I can't tell you how I feel, Sylvie. I'm beyond happy. Thank you for being so patient with me while I wrapped up my last case. Sylvie smiled at him, and Bailey felt her love. Why had he taken so long to come to be with her? It all seemed pointless now that he'd spent some time in the community. Now, the community was all that mattered. He had thought he'd miss the FBI, the cases, the excitement. He found it hard to tear himself away from a career that had taken hard work and many years to build. His old life was a futile one. He'd put people behind bars, but came to realize that some people just as guilty hid behind laws and others could afford fancy lawyers. Nothing seemed fair. Bailey resisted the urge to grin like a child or kiss her cheeks. Shall we go? With a flick of his wrist and a click from his mouth, he signaled the horse to walk on. Thought we'd go to town for ice cream first, and I've packed a picnic for lunch. He watched her lick her lips in approval. I haven't had ice cream for years. What's your favorite flavor? Bailey breathed in her scent, which was of soap and honeysuckle. Oh, I'm not fussy. Chocolate, I guess, or vanilla. You? Any. But I remember I had a passion for butterscotch, so sweet, Sylvie said. And so are you, Bailey thought as he watched her perfectly shaped lips form words. When they reached town, he secured the horse and took Sylvie for ice cream. Once they had cones filled with double scoops, they strolled around, up and down the main street, unaware of those around them. The worry about his nightmares had left him for now. When they finished, they were in the buggy once more and on their way to the picnic spot that Bailey had chosen. On the way there, Bailey had a flash of torment before his eyes. He squeezed his eyes shut against the dark images disturbing his wonderful day. He would not allow them to ruin things for Sylvie. Sylvie nudged him in the ribs. Were you sleeping? I thought I'd lost you to dreamland there for a second. No, just the sun in my eyes, that's all, Bailey said with a deliberate laugh. Good, a girl could get paranoid if her date falls asleep. They both laughed, and Bailey hoped she had believed him. Bailey had found this picnic spot some time ago, as he drove into the Amish farming community for the first time as an adult. It was a spot his grandfather had often taken him to. He unfolded a blanket and placed the picnic box down, and both he and Sylvie sat on the blanket. Since the day was hot, he had positioned the blanket under a tree with dappled shade. He opened a bottle of lemonade that Pamela had made, and poured 2 glasses. So, Sylvie said after swallowing a sip of lemonade. What do you dream of when you sleep? She took a bite of her cheese sandwich. Can she read my mind with those magical eyes? Can she see into the dark and shadowy truths behind mine? Bailey bit a huge chunk from his sandwich, using the time it would take to chew it to think of something to say. He had to move the discussion away from his dreams. He could not lie to his future wife, but how could he explain the truth? He couldn't. He swallowed his mouthful. Working, paying my way, building you a strong house to raise our children. Loving you until the good Lord takes us home. Bailey's heart raced in his chest. What else is there? That's wonderful to hear, dear sweet Bailey. Sylvie rested her hand on his. But what I meant was, what kind of work do you dream of doing? Which occupation would truly satisfy you? You don't want anything stressful like your last job, so what now? Ah, I see. Thank you, God. I'll find satisfaction in earning enough to pay for our lives together. I haven't thought beyond that. You are a sweetheart, Bailey. Sylvie tilted her head. Perhaps what you want to do will pay for our lives together. Don't throw away this opportunity to find out what that is before you settle into something for the rest of your days. He lowered his gaze, then looked up at her. The sunshine streamed through her organza prayer cap, and he could see her braids of gold fastened beneath it. Her eyes glistened with goodness and truth. She was a good woman indeed. What do you dream about, Sylvie? Me? Sylvie asked. Bailey could have sworn he saw her cheeks flush just before she looked away, and then off into the distance. I dream of us, of our life together, what our children will look like. Bailey held out his hand, and she placed her hand in his. Although, after today, I'll dream about pistachio ice cream too. Sylvie gave a giggle and lay on her back and closed her eyes from the shaded light. Bailey lay next to her and turned on his side to face her. I can hardly wait to be your wife. I never thought I'd marry again until I met you, Bailey. I never dreamed I'd be this happy. We will have a wonderful life together. You can rely on me, Sylvie. The most pressing thing was to rid himself of his nightmares, and then the next was to find some paying work. He was shortly to be married, and he could not live off his wife. But more than that, he could not bear the idea of poisoning the peace between them with anything rotten from his past. She wrapped her tiny hand around his and closed her eyes. I know. I trust you with my heart. Could I love her any more than I already do? He thought to himself. Chapter 3. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? Psalm chapter 27.1. How wonderful today has been, Sylvie thought. How nice it was to walk through town with the one I love. Sabrina burst into her room without any invitation, as usual. Sylvie, you're back. How was it? I do wish you'd knock. Whatever for? We are sisters. We have no secrets. Bailey, on the other hand, has at least one. Ah, please, not this again. He's a good man, can't you leave him be? Nay, because you're too trusting. Sabrina flounced further into the room and slumped onto Sylvie's bed next to her. She squeezed Sylvie's hand. Bailey is hiding something. He's shifty, can't you see it in his eyes? All I see in his beautiful hazel eyes is kindness, and there's nothing wrong with trusting someone. Sylvie snatched her hand from Sabrina's. I don't know why you're so against him. What did he ever do to you? He's shown you nothing but respect and patience when a lesser man might have scolded you for your meddling ways. Don't get me wrong, I see what you see in him. He's handsome. He's tall, fair, and yes, he has something dreamy going on, but that doesn't mean he's not hiding something. Like what? Sylvie wished she wouldn't be so annoying. What could he be hiding? Well, he never did tell you about his family. Where are his people, Sylvie? Don't you want to know more about the man you plan to spend the rest of your life with? Or are you just happy that he makes you feel good for now? Sylvie supposed she had a point. She didn't know much about Bailey's immediate family. Don't be silly, Sabrina. You know very well that his great-aunties are Elsa May and Eddie, and their brooder was Bailey's grandfather. What more do I need to know than that? I know Elsa May and Eddie very well. I meet with them once a week when the 5 of us widows get together. Elsa May thinks she's clever, it's plain to see. I don't think she'd think anything of keeping a secret or two from you. Nonsense, you're being silly now. Can't you just let me be happy? Sabrina had got Sylvie thinking. She knew nothing of his immediate family. But she was more interested in their future, not his past. When Bailey feels like telling me about his family, I'll be ready to listen. Until then, I figure it's none of my business. Sylvie was not being entirely honest with herself or her sister because she was curious. Always had been too, but she would not press Bailey to tell her more than he could bear. I'm not a silly young woman, Sabrina. I'm old enough to know a man's heart is made up of many experiences, and not all of them will be good, especially in the line of work he was in. Exactly, if I... Sylvie raised her hand and rested a finger at the center of Sabrina's lips, effectively silencing her. If I this, if I that. Thing is, it isn't you, so don't you worry your pretty young head about me. She stood and poked Sabrina's nose tip playfully. Your turn will come, sister, and when you fall in love, woe betide anyone who runs their mouth off about him. I've been in love. Anyway, there's no reasoning with you. I was just trying to warn you to be careful. Sabrina shoved herself up from the bed, her spine straight and her chin out. One way or another, I'm going to find out what's making him so shifty. Sylvie grimaced. Please leave my room. I have a headache and would like a little peace. Sylvie knew who Bailey was, and she trusted him to do the right thing for them both. That was all any wife could do. Fine. Sabrina huffed as she walked towards the door. And Sabrina, before you go. Yeah. If you love me at all, accept that I'm marrying Bailey and let that be an end to it. Sabrina offered no reply, only a furrowed brow and pursed lips. She left the room, shutting the door very firmly behind her. Sylvie sighed, knowing Sabrina had no intention of accepting Bailey. Bailey had returned from his blissful day with Sylvie, full of energy and enthusiasm. He got to work on writing 5 letters to prospective employers in and around town. Sylvie's question had made him think more about the kind of job he would prefer. He would contact more companies again tomorrow, just in case they had openings. Maybe he had to try a few jobs first to find out what he wanted to do. A horse's hooves clip-clopped outside, a familiar signal that someone had arrived. Bailey rose to his feet. He knew it was a buggy, other than Jack's buggy. There was no way Jack could be back so soon. Sylvie? He ran to the door with the letter he had been writing still in his hand. But when he swung the door open, he found Sabrina. Ah, Sabrina. He fought an audible groan. Sabrina more often than not meant trouble. He tossed the letter he was holding onto a small table on the porch. Then a bolt of panic caught in his throat when he considered her reason for coming alone. Is it Sylvie? Has there been an accident? Well, let me think. Stop playing games, is she all right? Of course she's well. Do you think I'd be all the way out here if she weren't? I'd be by her bedside, brooder-in-law to be. Sabrina put one shiny leather boot up on the porch step. Won't you invite me in? She asked. I would, of course, but surely you realize why I can't. 1, it's not my house to extend invitations, and 2, it's inappropriate for you to be here unaccompanied. What business could you possibly have with me anyway? Bailey folded his arms and waited for her smart-mouthed reply that he knew would be coming. I saw Jack and Pamela in town just now, and I told them I was on my way to see you. They said they'd be right along, so don't worry. It's just that I promised Sylvie that I would make more of an effort to get to know you. Family is extremely important, don't you think? Bailey flinched and noticed the look in her eye as she said it. He had to be careful with this one. She was shrewd beyond her years, and my, how she loved to pry. Yeah, I believe so. So, will you invite me in? It's dreadfully hot out here. Nay, Sabrina, I will not, and for the reasons I've already explained, and I'm busy with writing letters, so make it quick, will you? Bailey knew that his words were rude, but it was hard to offend a person like Sabrina. Sabrina stepped up on the porch and swished her way onto a large chair. Her eyes fell to the letter that was on a small table next to her. The letter he'd tossed there when he saw her approaching the house. Picking it up, she said, Is this one of your letters? Yeah, it is. Bailey tried to take the letter out of her hands, but she held it away from him. What interesting handwriting you have. Such fine penmanship. Did you attend college? Best in my class, once upon a time. Bailey made another grab for the letter, and this time he was successful. Are you going to offer me a cup of tea and something to eat? Bailey blew out a breath. Lemonade or tea? I'll have lemonade and a sandwich. Which college did you go to? Bailey busied himself sorting through the picnic basket, which was still on the porch. From nowhere, the vision from last night arrived and played out once more behind his eyes. Suddenly, he was back there in his nightmare. Bailey, are you all right? Sabrina's voice burst through the vision and dragged him back to Jack's home, to his uninvited guest. Yeah. I'm fine. The last person he needed to be around while experiencing a flashback was Sabrina. Just waiting for you to choose, that's all. Choose what? I've already said that I'll have lemonade and a sandwich. Are you sure you're okay? That was 2 flashbacks in one day. He'd never had this many before. They had become more frequent in the past months, but he'd never have been able to stay in his previous career if he'd had this many flashbacks. One of his colleagues would have noticed and reported him. Lemonade it is, then. I'll just get it from the cold box. Bailey could feel Sabrina's eyes on him through the window as he made his way through to the cold box in the kitchen. He hoped that Jack would return and prevent this woman from picking at his brain. Here it is, cool and sweet. Sylvie enjoyed several glasses earlier. And here's your sandwich. Bailey had found some leftover sandwiches from the picnic earlier. He poured himself a glass of lemonade as well, not to be sociable or polite, but because he was thirsty. Danka. She balanced the sandwich on her lap, then sipped some lemonade and grinned in pleasure. Impressive. Is it a family recipe? Bailey choked a little on his lemonade and looked past her. Excuse me, it went down the wrong way. Goodness, please be careful, Bailey. Sabrina feigned concern beautifully, apart from the shadow of a smile she could not disguise. Ahem. He wiped his mouth and realized his whole face was sweating. She knows I'm hiding something. Not mine, Jax. Yeah, his grandmother passed it on before she died. He glanced to the side of her, then at his drink, then thought of the letters he'd rather be completing. A good cook by all accounts. And what of your grandmother, Bailey? Is she still living in? She tapped her temple. Nope, I've forgotten. Where was it you said you came from again? Please, Jack, come home and disturb this interrogation. Bailey thought to himself. I didn't say. But nay, my grandmother is no longer with us. Sabrina's eyes widened, her mouth slightly gaped. But let's not talk about me, what about you? When will the lovely Sabrina get married? Surely you have a few men are knocking at your door? Just then Jack returned. The children jumped down from the buggy and ran to Bailey. Sorry, but you see how it is, Bailey said above the children's giggles as they climbed all over him. Perhaps I can see you with Sylvie next time? Sabrina glowered. Her small mouth drooped at the corners. Yeah, I'd better be going. If you must. Bailey picked up the youngest, who had wrapped himself around Sabrina's ankle. Once free from the child who had become entangled about her legs, Sabrina stood up. Yeah, I didn't realize the time. I'll have to help Sylvie with the dinner. Danka for the lemonade and the sandwich, Bailey. I will see you soon. Chapter 4. The fear of the Lord is clean, enduring forever. The judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. Psalm chapter 19 verse 9. After her wonderful day with Bailey, Sylvie arrived at the widows' meeting, which was always held at the house of the elderly sisters, Elsa May and Eddie. She was concerned that Sabrina had been missing for a couple of hours that afternoon, and after the conversation they'd had, she was more than certain that Sabrina had gone to visit Bailey. The race was on. Sylvie had to find out about Bailey's family before Sabrina did. If there was anything bad to know, she could not wait for Bailey to tell her, just in case Sabrina found out first. She would have to ask his elderly great-aunts, Elsa May and Eddie. Eddie answered her knock on the door, and she was ushered into the living room where everyone sat on old rickety chairs. Emma and Maureen, the younger widows, were there as well. Emma had recently married Will, but she was still part of their group. As usual, Eddie's old dog, Ginger, laid sprawled out in a corner of the room, opening one eye every now and again. You look disturbed, Sylvie. What's wrong? Emma asked. Sylvie took a deep breath and looked around at the widows whose eyes were fastened onto her. It's just that Sabrina's got it into her head that Bailey's hiding something from me. Sylvie noticed that Elsa May and Eddie shot each other a glance. What is it? I saw you two look at each other. Please tell me, Sylvie said to the elderly widows. It's nothing, Eddie said. Just that sister of yours is making trouble again. She looks for trouble, Elsa May added quickly. Sylvie looked carefully at the two elderly ladies. Eddie stared back at her, and Elsa May put her head down and picked up her knitting. Elsa May, is there something that you want to tell me? Elsa May lowered her knitting and looked at Emma. I don't know anything to tell you. All I know is that Bailey's father was a hard man. We lost touch with our brooder, Bailey's grandfather, when he left the community. Bailey's father is not the one related to us, it's Liz, Jonah's daughter, Bailey's mother. You make it sound so confusing, Elsa May. Our brooder's name was Jonah, his daughter is Liz, and Liz is Bailey's mother. Anyway, Jonah left the community before he was 20, and we never saw him again. I thought I saw him many years later, at the edge of our farm. I ran as fast as I could toward him, but the man I saw got in a car and drove away. I never knew if it was him or not, Eddie said. I do have a feeling it was him. What caused Jonah to leave the community? Maureen asked. It appeared to Sylvie that she wasn't the only one who wanted to know about Bailey's history. We're not sure, Eddie answered quickly, even though Elsa May had already opened her mouth to answer Maureen. Elsa May turned to look at Eddie. Well, I'm not sure, are you? Eddie asked her sister. Elsa May shrugged her shoulders and shook her head. You must have some idea. He must have given some reason, Sylvie said. If he did, he didn't give it to us, Eddie said. Now, how are the plans for your wedding going? Sylvie knew she would get no answers from them. She was satisfied that if it were something that she should know, then her friends, Bailey's great aunts, would have told her. Things are coming on well. I've got the food tents organized, the ladies to help with the food, and I'm starting on the dresses. You're leaving things a little late, aren't you? Eddie asked. Nay, I've got Bailey's suit and his attendant's suit sewn. Emma and I can help you with the dresses, Sylvie, Maureen said. Emma nodded. Yeah, we'd be glad to help, of course. The remainder of the widows' meeting was filled with laughter and each of them eating many sweet things, but Sylvie had her mind elsewhere. When Sylvie arrived home, Sabrina was still awake and sitting on the couch. Sabrina, you're still awake? Yeah, I couldn't sleep. I've got an early start at work tomorrow too. Is something disturbing you? Sylvie asked. I'm just thinking about when you get married to Bailey. I can't stay here in the house. Of course you can. You can stay here as long as you like. Nay, I can't. I would feel awkward, and you and Bailey need your time alone. Sylvie sighed. It's because you don't like him, isn't it? I don't dislike him, I just think he's hiding something. But that's got nothing to do with it. You should have your privacy. Sylvie did not want to have Sabrina on her own somewhere. She could only imagine what kind of trouble she might get into. You will stay with me until you get married, or you will have to go back home to Ohio and live with Mom and Dad. Sabrina's mouth fell open. I haven't met anyone, that could be ages away. Sylvie continued, I won't hear another word about it. Sabrina pushed out her bottom lip. Stop it. I won't hear another word about it. Off to bed with you, Sylvie said before she walked out of the room. When the widows' meeting was over, Eddie and Elsa May closed the door after they waved goodbye to Maureen, Sylvie and Emma. Eddie leaned over Ginger and stroked his back with 2 long strokes. Good night, old boy. Well, what do you think of what Sylvie had to say? Elsa May said, as she sat down and picked up her knitting. Do you think we should have said something to her? Eddie, it's not our place to say anything. It's Bailey who should be the one to tell her. It appears he isn't. Maybe he doesn't know. Eddie sat down in a chair next to her sister and picked up the last cookie, which was left over from their get-together. Well, it's hard to know exactly what we could have told her. Whatever we would have told her would have only led to more questions, Elsa May said. Eddie nibbled on the cookie as she looked deep in thought. Elsa May continued, what is it we know that we could have said? Bailey's mother, Liz, came to stay with us to get away from Bailey's father for 6 months. I don't think that Bailey even remembers coming here, does he? Eddie shook her head and swallowed some cookie. When we met him again as a young man, he said nothing of staying with us. He acted as though he'd never met us. Remember, we thought it best not to say anything because it would only bring back memories of a dark time in his and his mother's life. I can't see why Jonah's daughter married that man in the first place. Eddie said. Elsa May untied the strings of her prayer cap. How old do you think that Bailey was when he came here? Eddie blew out her cheeks while she thought. Then she counted on her fingers. 7 or 8. Yeah, I was thinking he would have been about 8. Why Liz went back to that terrible man, I'll never know. Love does crazy things to people. Love or a death wish? What do you mean, Eddie? She must have known she'd be in for more harsh treatment, and Bailey would have been at risk. Even if you love someone, you shouldn't stay if you're being abused. Even the community allows separation under extreme circumstances, if you've tried all else and you still can't live with one another, Eddie said. People deserve second chances, I suppose, Elsa May said. Liz said in her letters that Denman was treating her better. She wouldn't have said so if it weren't true. Elsa May shrugged her shoulders and continued knitting. Chapter 5. His ways are always grievous, thy judgments are far above out of his sight. As for all his enemies, he puffeth at them. Psalm chapter 10 verse 5. Bailey woke early the next morning after another rough night. He had a big day ahead of him, helping Jack on the farm. He'd been staying with Jack's family for months now, and it still felt odd being a guest in someone else's home. After milking the cows, Bailey and Jack were off to the far field to fix some fences. "I'm glad you've come to stay, Bailey. It's good to have some help on the farm for a change. It's good of you and Pamela to have me here." Bailey hoped that Jack had not heard him during the night. He was sure he had screamed out in terror. He hoped the smile on his face masked what lay within him. "Good." Jack put the fencing wire and the tools in the back of the wagon. "Let's go." Just then, the children ran out to the wagon. "You go back inside the house now and help Ma'am," Jack directed them. Bailey looked at the laughing faces of the young children and longed for a family of his own. He hoped that he would be as good a father as Jack. He watched Jack as he waved to his children. "We'll be back for the midday meal. As soon as your chores are done, I'm sure your ma'am will let you out to play. But stay around the house and don't go into the barn." The children did as Jack asked and walked back inside the house. As the wagon pulled away, Bailey asked, "Why can't they go into the barn, Jack?" Jack frowned. "The horses. I don't want them getting into the stalls and stirring up the horses." Jack had 2 workhorses and 2 buggy horses. He continued, "Apart from that, there's nothing that can hurt them around these parts." "They might get lost or worse," Bailey said. Jack laughed. "They've been playing in these fields since they could walk. They know them well enough. And no one comes out here. Don't be so worried about things, there's no danger. I guess in your old line of work, you had to think about dangerous possibilities." Bailey fixed his eyes on the horizon. Jack was right, he was always looking for things that could go wrong, so he could prevent them. "Yes, you're right, I'm making a fuss over nothing." After they had been in the bumpy wagon driving through the fields for 10 minutes, Jack pulled the wagon to a halt. "We'll do this section first." Bailey had to pull the wire tight, while Jack hammered U-shaped nails into and on top of the sturdy wooden poles. After several minutes of small talk, mostly about Sylvie, Jack said, "Bailey, I don't know how to speak on this, so I'll just say it. I heard you last night. Even poked my head around your door to see if you were okay." Bailey felt his chest tighten. His secret was affecting more than just himself. "I'm sorry I woke you. No one else heard me?" Jack shook his head and continued, "Everyone gets the odd nightmare, but you were fighting and mumbling things. Things I couldn't make sense of. I've noticed you get a faraway look in your eyes at times, and I would have to say that you seem troubled. I'll sleep in the farmhands' quarters attached to the barn from now on. I can't expect you all to suffer because of me." "Suffer? Waking you all in the dead of night?" "Only me, and I was already awake. I'm a light sleeper and need only 4 hours a night. Maybe it's because I'm a farmer, I don't know. Either way, there's no need to move. The rest of the family slept right through. That's not why I'm raising the subject. You can trust me to tell me what's bothering you." Bailey did trust him, but what would he think of him if he told him? His dreams didn't even make sense to himself. "It's not that I don't trust you, Jack. You've been a true friend." He wiped the sweat off his brow with the side of his sleeve. "Then what is it? Talk to me, Bailey." Bailey looked into the face of his friend and saw someone who genuinely cared for him. "I've been having nightmares for some time now. And now, during the day, I'm starting to get slammed with images that I don't understand. The images are like the nightmares, but in flashes." "Ah." Jack couldn't hide his concern in his expression. "Well, it's just that I've noticed something isn't right with you. And well, thing is, I know a doctor who can help." "Doctor?" He'd had enough of doctors. This was his problem, he had to deal with it alone. What can a doctor do? He's a special doctor. Bailey laughed. "You're not talking to one of your children, Jack. He's a psychiatrist, is he?" Jack tapped his head. "Says his main interest is in healing minds." Raising his hand, he stopped Bailey from the protest he no doubt expected. "Now I know it might sound a little odd, he's a good man. I trust he would do his best for you. You can't go on like this. I thought Amish didn't go in for doctors too much." Some prefer to keep to the old ways and dabble in herbal and old-fashioned type remedies, but there's nothing to prevent us from using doctors when the need arises. Bailey thought about going to see another doctor. What about Sylvie? Jack asked. You don't want whatever's troubling you to affect her. Her name repeated around Bailey's head. What if she finds out? Would I lose her? It would be terrifying to see me wake up screaming, and I can't even explain it. Okay, if you trust him, that's good enough for me. If you have his details, I'll make an appointment. See what this fellow has to offer. Can't hurt. Bailey did not tell Jack that he had been to one of the best clinical psychiatrists around, Dr. Chivers, and she could not help him. But back then he was not as desperate for help as he was now. Bailey thought back to his appointments with Dr. Chivers. Dr. Maria Chivers had been trying to get Bailey to have hypnotherapy for some time, but he was too nervous. He did not like the idea of someone prying into his memories while being unaware of what they found. You may have a buried memory of trauma, perhaps, which is causing these disturbances, she'd said while tapping on her laptop. But I don't understand, why would something that happened so long ago make this happen now? The traumatic event is so harsh sometimes that it remains, sometimes for decades or a lifetime, inside your mind. It's these emotions that manifest themselves in traumatic nightmares and intrusive daytime images, both of them offering vivid reenactments of the trauma to your conscious mind. But they don't feel like memories. Not my memories anyway. There is no recognition, no understanding, they seem like random nightmares. That's because they're dissociative episodes. You have forgotten some trauma to such an extent that you are dissociated or disconnected from it entirely. It is this disassociation from your past which we must remedy. I suggest hypnosis to begin with. Bailey's eyes had widened with confusion. Much of what the doctor explained only confused him more, but it persuaded him that she knew an awful lot about something that he did not. Dr. Chivers had said that she could treat what ailed him, treat what threatened his future peace, but he'd been afraid to trust her. You need to slow down, Bailey. Dr. Chivers' voice echoed in admonishment in the back of his mind. If only it were so simple. Slow down, he had demanded that final meeting. Slowing down is the last thing I need right now. Dr. Chivers' office was always obsessively neat. Maybe she had some kind of a disorder of her own. He always meant to ask her if she had a thing against clutter. The wooden desk gleamed and always smelled of orange oil, every pencil and sheet of paper so meticulously placed that it might have been measured. Dr. Chivers sat behind that desk as she looked at him from over the top of her glasses. Bailey, these dreams are trying to send you a message. You need to take the time to understand what they are saying. She straightened her notepad and pencil as she spoke. What do you think this is for? He rubbed his chin hard as he paced up and down her pristine office. Bailey, these sessions can be helpful, but only if you slow down enough for us to search out the root of the problem. Even in the middle of our meetings, your mind is going in 10 different directions. How many times have we gone over my dreams, doctor? He asked bitterly. How many dream journals? Talks about my childhood, my relationships? It's been a year. If there were anything to find, we would have found it by now. Perhaps, she agreed, leaning her chin onto her laced hands in silence. Providing you want to find the answer, Bailey, and providing you're ready to find it. Why wouldn't I want to find an answer? Bailey almost shouted. That is what we need to find out. It could be a memory your consciousness doesn't want to deal with right now. In cases like this, we'll sabotage our efforts to remember these events by keeping our conscious minds too occupied to fill in the missing gaps. Bailey, we have spoken many times about your childhood, but there are a lot of things that you haven't wanted to talk about. Could there be something in your past from which you are hiding? The buzzer sounded, and their time had come to an end. Hers was a fitting question to end the appointment, and that appointment had become their last, as he had never gone back. Bailey had walked out of Dr. Chivers' office and into the waiting room, realized he was not ready to face the world, and sat on one of the chairs. He looked at the fish tank beside him. Bailey knew that fish were supposed to help calm clients or something along those lines. He watched the fish gliding through the water, and they did give him a sense of calm. His attention had focused on one particular fish. Unlike all the others that were meandering aimlessly through the tank, this one swam with bold, strong strokes. The thing that had disturbed Bailey was that the fish were trapped. They did not have an ocean in which to swim. They were trapped in a tiny space and would never know what it was like to be free. Bailey realized that he felt that he was trapped. In an instant, he remembered a dream he had of being trapped in a tight space. I'm free, he told himself. I'm okay. He then had steeled himself to stand up, walk out the door and face the world, knowing that his dreams weren't real. Bailey, Jack said. Bailey looked across at Jack and was back in the present moment. You were 1,000,000 miles away. I was thinking of, remembering a good doctor I saw once. She suggested I should have hypnotherapy, and I resisted. I will go and see your doctor. Danke, Jack. Jack smiled. I'll call him when we get back to the barn and make you an appointment. Chapter 6. In the house of the righteous is much treasure, but in the revenues of the wicked is trouble. The lips of the wise disperse knowledge, but the heart of the foolish doth not so. Proverbs chapter 15 verses 6-7. Did I tell you that Mr. Carruthers said that he might make my job full-time? Sabrina, that's excellent news. Sylvie placed a plateful of scrambled egg and toast in front of Sabrina, then fixed some on a plate for herself. I said I'd do breakfast this morning, Sylvie. I was up early, so I thought I'd make a start on it. Is there coffee? Sabrina looked towards the stove. Nay, I forgot, sorry. Sabrina rose to her feet and clutched the coffee pot. Something on your mind? Nay, tell me about your job. Are they getting busier, or are they going to get you to do different things? Sylvie knew she would have to control the subject, otherwise Sabrina would start in about Bailey again. They're thinking of opening another auction yard. Mr. Carruthers said it's nearly 100 miles away. But you'll be staying here, won't you? They can't expect you to move from your home. Yeah, I'll be staying here with the local branch, but I do want to move out. If I get full-time pay, I'll be able to move out in no time. Nay, Sabrina. You'll stay here. Mom and Dad wouldn't like it if you moved out of this house. I can't stay here once you're married. I'd feel like an intruder. We've been through this already, Sabrina. Not another word. Sylvie knew her parents would be most upset if Sabrina moved out, and would most likely want her to go back to Ohio rather than live by herself somewhere. I don't know where you think you'd live anyway. I'll find a place, things always work out for me. While the coffee pot was coming to the boil, Sabrina sat back down in front of her eggs. The last thing I need at the moment is to worry about you. What do you mean? What else are you worried about? Sabrina stared across the table at Sylvie. Sylvie looked away from Sabrina's big blue eyes. It's just that, the wedding and all that. I've got the wedding on my mind and all the organization, and hoping that this house fits all the people who are coming. You could have it at someone else's house. What about Emma and Will's house? That's a huge place. Sylvie shook her head. Nay, they're still in the middle of renovations. I couldn't have it there. Anyway, all the invitations have been handed out with this address. Where's all the family staying? Mom and Dad are staying at the Millers, and John, Eli and Jared are staying here. Sabrina scooped some egg onto her fork and popped it in her mouth. Elias, Peter and their wives aren't coming, and neither are John and Eli's wives and their children. Sylvie nodded. When I get married, I would expect everyone to come. It's a long way to come. Someone has to look after the farms. I guess I'm lucky that any of them are coming at all. I suppose Jared's coming to look around for a wife. Weddings are always good places to meet everyone in the community. He's old to still be unmarried. Would be nice if he met a girl and moved around here. Yeah, I suppose, but then there would be another sibling watching every move I make, Sabrina said. Nay, no one's watching what you do. Do you have a guilty conscience about something? Nay, Sylvie, I do not. Sylvie giggled. I think it would be nice to have more family around. You and Bailey can have lots of children then, and make your own family. Yeah, we will. So when Bailey sells his house, is he buying one around here? I expect so. Or we might just live in this one for a while. Sabrina took a deep breath and then blurted, I can't live with you. Can't you see that? Sylvie shook her head. You can and you will, or Mom and Dad will force you to go back with them. Can't you see that? They can't make me do anything like that. I'm nearly 20. Sylvie raised her eyebrows. What's that look for? I've got a job here and friends, they can't make me leave, can they? Would you really go against what they tell you to do? Sabrina frowned and tapped her chin with her fingertips. I don't know. Well, best you don't make a fuss about living here, or they'll see that you go back with them when the wedding is over. Sylvie knew that although Sabrina was nearly 20, she had an overwhelming ability to get herself into trouble. She needed Sabrina close where she could keep an eye on her. Although Sabrina was a handful, she was her sister, and she was duty-bound to look after her the best she could. After a few minutes describing his history to Dr. Phillips, the man Jack had recommended, this doctor made the same suggestion as Dr. Chivers had, hypnotherapy. I'll book an appointment for you tomorrow, and that way we will be uninterrupted. I'll see if Dr. Chivers can send over your files. But don't expect immediate results. It'll more than likely take a few sessions to see any change in your situation. I'm willing to do what it takes, doctor. The doctor looked pleased. Good. The doctor turned his attention away from Bailey and made some notes into his cumbersome desktop computer. Bailey looked around the small room and saw no place where he would lie down on a couch. The office was dark and boring, nothing like the tastefully decorated surrounds of Dr. Chivers' office. When Bailey got home, Jack was waiting to take the 4 older boys into town. When they left, Bailey sat on the porch and tried to empty his mind. Pamela poked her head out the door. Would you like some coffee? I'd love one, Denka. Pamela returned with 2 mugs of coffee and slices of orange cake. I'll join you while the little one's asleep. You don't get much of a rest, do you? Pamela laughed. That's the way I like it. There's always something to keep me busy. Bailey chatted with Pamela until the toddler woke up. Chapter 7. A merry heart maketh a cheerful countenance, but by sorrow of the heart the spirit is broken. Proverbs chapter 15 verse 13. Ouch, Emma yelped before sucking her needle-pricked thumb. Bless her for helping, but Sylvie wanted to wear a pristine wedding dress, certainly not a blood-splattered one. Here, a tissue. Thanks. Sorry, I'm so clumsy, Emma said as she wrapped the tissue around her finger. Something distracting you, Emma? You seem distant today. I'm sorry, I got carried away with the conversation and didn't look where I was sewing and sewed my thumb. Emma gave a giggle. It's not long now, is it? Not long till you're a married lady. Yeah, I'm so looking forward to it. Sylvie hoped with all her heart that Bailey felt the same flurry in his stomach, the same happy dreams of their life together and the same longings. Emma shook her head. Will I ever tire of talking about my wedding and married life? Her face beamed with delight. Sylvie imagined how she would feel after making her vows before God. She could not wait. However, Bailey's recent odd behavior, along with the constant stirring from Sabrina, had given her cause for unsettled sleep these past few nights. What if he's changed his mind? Would he be too decent to go back on his promise? Of course he would. But I'm certain I see love in those hazel eyes. I must have faith. Oh, hold this for me, Sylvie? Emma asked. Sylvie held up the blue dress that she would wear to begin her new life. I've lost a needle on the floor. It fell down here somewhere. As Emma fussed over finding the missing needle, mumbling and lifting then lowering the sewing bag, the fabric, and various other items about the floor, Sabrina walked straight to it. Looking for this? She held it up like a prize before returning it to its rightful owner. Please don't get blood on my sister's dress, Emma. It will add a morbid theme to the proceedings. Under her breath, Sabrina added, and it may turn out to be morbid enough. Sylvie clenched her jaw, having heard Sabrina's spiteful remark clearly enough. Just sit and sew, won't you? Whatever do you mean, Sabrina? Emma frowned innocently at Sylvie, then Sabrina. What could make a wedding morbid? Weddings are such happy occasions. Oh, Sabrina drawled with her hand on her hip. Sylvie glared, silently daring Sabrina to say anything derogatory about Bailey. Morbid because. Sabrina bit her lip. Well, weddings are such a bore. What? Emma sat back in the chair. What woman doesn't love a wedding? She frowned again and adjusted her prayer cap. I never heard of such a thing. Sabrina looked at Sylvie. Sylvie knew that Sabrina loved weddings, and that her comment was another excuse to express her doubts about Bailey being a good match for her. Sylvie did not doubt her love for Bailey, but had begun to wonder whether he had changed his mind about her. But it's a declaration to God about a couple's intention to love each until they go home to be with the Lord, Emma reasoned aloud, not looking at either of them. It's. Of course it is. Sabrina raised her hand to silence Emma. Perhaps what I meant to say. Perhaps, it's not weddings as such, it's more about who gets wed that I have a problem with in general, of course. Sylvie watched Emma raise her eyebrows at Sabrina's outburst. Sylvie knew that Emma had understood Sabrina's point, that she was making a slur against Bailey. Sylvie loved Emma for being able to exercise polite restraint. Emma could have easily taken Sabrina to task over her wicked comments, but she kept the peace. Perhaps, Sabrina, when a good man asks you to marry, you'll think differently. And when you truly love a man so much you'd defend him with your life, you and I can sit as equals and discuss this again. Sylvie smiled kindly and held up one of the dresses on which Sabrina had been working. For now, this has to be finished today, time's running out. Danka for pointing that out for me, dear sister. Sabrina scowled, snatched the dress out of Sylvie's hands, and slumped into the chair next to her to continue where she left off. Whatever will I do when you're a busy wife and have no time to guide your little sister? After an awkward silence, Emma diverted the conversation. It's such a pretty shade of blue you've chosen, Sylvie. It's the same shade as your eyes, yours too, Sabrina. Sabrina forced a smile, but kept her head down as she executed some small stitches. You'll love being married just as I do, Emma said to Sylvie. Ah, but you were both married before. Did you forget? Sabrina said with a snigger. Sabrina, that's a hurtful thing to say, Sylvie said, wishing her sister would hold her tongue instead of saying the first thing that came into her head. Yeah, Sabrina, sometimes my head forgets but never my heart, Emma said with a kindly smile. Sabrina carried her point further by saying, Sylvie already knows how it feels to be a wife, don't you, sister? Of course I do. Sylvie tried not to show Sabrina that she was flustered by her words. She was not ashamed of being a widow. A marriage is made up of two personalities, so this marriage will be different than my first. Yeah. I imagine it will, Sabrina mumbled. You know, the English don't have the same commitment toward marriage that we do. I hope he doesn't grow bored with you, like so many of the Englishers do with their marriages. They think nothing of divorce. Emma looked up from her sewing. Sabrina, he's Amish now. He's just been baptized and taken the instruction. You can't call him English. That's right, Sabrina. Bailey's not English. Sylvie inhaled sharply and fisted her dress in both hands. Sylvie meant what she said. She would defend her Bailey against Sabrina's mudslinging. But some of her mud had begun to stick, and she wasn't sure if she'd forgive Sabrina if it ruined her relationship. She wanted to trust and be happy, but in her heart she already had a nagging suspicion that all was not well with Bailey. Emma frowned while she sewed silently. Sylvie knew that Emma had been just as shocked as she at Sabrina's constant negative talk of Bailey. Sabrina held up the dress in her hands, allowing the sun to pass through the blue fabric. Tell me, Sylvie, did you use the same material manufacturer as Emma? It's so beautiful. I did. Sylvie exhaled, happy for the change of subject and diffused tension. They're very good and affordable compared to some. Yeah, Sabrina said, her attention returned to her sewing. It wouldn't do to waste too much money on. Sylvie kicked Sabrina's ankle under the table while she gave her a stern look. Tisk. Sabrina flinched. That hurt. Good, it was meant to. And I'll do it again if you don't stop saying horrible things about my future husband and your future brooder-in-law. Sabrina remained silent, and Sylvie kicked her sharply once more. Ow, Sylvie. Sylvie stared at Sabrina until she said, "Okay, I'll keep quiet." Sabrina looked over toward Emma, and Emma looked back to her sewing. "Hello." Maureen knocked on the door. Sylvie jumped to her feet and let her in. "Sorry, Sylvie, I've just gotten off from work. I had to stay late and do a couple of extra things." As Maureen walked toward the kitchen where the other ladies sat, she looked at everyone. "Everyone's quiet, what's wrong?" Emma was quick to say, "Nothing, we were just having a lively discussion, but it's over now." Maureen smiled. "Now what can I do, Sylvie?" "We were having a discussion about Bailey," Sabrina said. Maureen nodded and kept quiet. "Enough said, Sabrina," Sylvie said, frowning at her sister. Sylvie turned back to Maureen. "You can do this hem for me, Maureen." Maureen took a seat and threaded a needle. Chapter 8. A wrathful man stirreth up strife, but he that is slow to anger appeaseth strife. Proverbs chapter 15 verse 18. Bailey sat in Dr. Phillips' waiting room. It was nothing like Dr. Chiver's lush office quarters. There was no fish tank filled with rare tropical fish and no white leather couches. The room was small and sparse with 4 metal and vinyl-covered chairs and 1 coffee table filled with out-of-date newspapers. The doctor poked his head into the room. "Bailey Rivers." "Yup," Bailey said, half amused that he was the only person in the waiting room and the doctor should have known who he was since he was just there the day before. There was no receptionist. "Have a seat," the doctor ordered. There was no couch, just 2 easy chairs in the doctor's small office. Bailey sat in one of them and tried to wind down. "Relax. It's important that you forget about me here and think that you are in your own room, alone, quiet, relaxed." Bailey tried to allow his stress to melt away, but when the doctor said own room, he couldn't help but think that he had no room or home that he could call his own, not at the moment. He would pretend he was in bed late at night at Jack and Pamela's house. "Okay," Bailey linked his fingers over his chest and closed his eyes. "I'm ready." "And don't speak." "All right. Clear your mind, Bailey. Let go of work, of Sylvie, of all concerns. One by one blow them out as if they were candle flames." Bailey had never realized how relaxing his new doctor's voice was. He did as he was told, listening to the slow rhythmic hum of the low voice, allowing his instructions to push away his thoughts. Soon he floated upward, leaving the cozy confines of Dr. Phillips' office, drifting back into his past, to his childhood. His mother smiled, and he knew the world was right. He'd had a full day, he'd completed his morning tasks and had played the rest of the day. "Go get your father. He's been gone a while now." Bailey watched her kneading bread and thought her an angel, with her blonde hair and her milky complexion. "Yes, Mom." "What's happening, Bailey? Where are you?" The doctor's voice intruded. "I'm in the fields at the back of our house, looking for my dad. Mom told me to call him. He's late for dinner." "Can you see your father, Bailey? Keep going until you see him." Bailey ran through the same fields he'd played in his whole life, fields at the back of his house. Bailey could smell the grass, the earth and the wildflowers as the soft breeze blew against his face. "Yes, I can see him, not far from the house, and he's with someone. Can't make out who he's with." "What do you do now, Bailey?" "I slow down, don't want to make him angry again by disturbing him. He wouldn't take too kindly to being told Mom wants him to come inside, not in front of someone else." Bailey knew that the last thing he wanted to do was set off one of his dad's rages. "Okay, can you see what's happening, Bailey? Get close enough to see what your father's up to, but stay out of sight." I don't want to go any closer." Bailey thrashed on the armchair. "He's fighting that man now." Got his hands around his throat, making the man's face turn purple. "You're safe, Bailey. It's okay." "Can't breathe." "Oh no. What is it? What's wrong?" "Dad turned and saw me. He knows I saw him hurt the man. Got to get away, he looks angry. Don't let him get me." "You're safe, Bailey. No one can hurt you." He's chasing me through the long grass back toward the house." "You're safe, Bailey, no one can hurt you." "He's telling me to stop, but I'm too scared and I'm running." Bailey was running through the tall grass at the back of his childhood home. The top of his shirt was grabbed from behind, and he was scooped up and stowed under his father's arm. He struggled to free himself, but it was no use. "Can't get away, he's got me." "Bailey, listen to my voice." "What did you do?" Soon he was in darkness. He was in his home, shut in the large cupboard off from the kitchen. "Don't lock me in here. It's dark and cold. Let me out, please, Daddy." "Where are you, Bailey?" "I'm in our house, locked in a cupboard. Won't let me out, it's been ages, maybe days. I cry and cry, but he won't let me out. I think of the man with the purple face. He's dead, I know he is." Images and sounds flooded Bailey's mind. "I can hear Mom begging for him to let me out. She talks to me through the door when he's out, telling me everything will be okay. But when she's out, Dad tells me if I ever tell a soul about what I saw, he'll take Mom away from me." Bailey sobbed like the child he once was, about the fear, the threat, and the childhood stolen by his own father. "Okay, that's enough for now, Bailey. I'm counting backward, and when I reach 1, you will wake refreshed. You will remember everything, and it will no longer upset you." "No longer upset me," Bailey repeated through sobs. 5, 4, 3, you're waking up, hearing me clearer. 2, you're in the room with me on the chair. 1, open your eyes. Bailey remembered all of what he had just replayed in his mind, but at the same time felt calm and unafraid. He did all of that, I remember now. As if it were yesterday. There was no bed in that room, and I had to sleep on the floor. It was so cold, and hearing Mother crying, begging, made my heart ache. But the fear of losing Mom, and the memory of the dead man crippled me. The doctor was silent for a few moments. "We've just had a good result. It could have taken months or years to reach this point." Bailey knew it had taken him years already. He needed to resolve it now. Dr. Phillips spoke again. "You were close to your mother? Tell me about her." "She was soft and kind, the opposite of my dad." He sniggered, though he felt no humor. "In the end, Dad let me out, because he'd made me believe he'd kill her if I told anyone. We lived like nothing happened for years after that. Dad was away a lot after that, with work. I guess it's real, isn't it? How could I have pushed the whole thing out of my mind? How could I forget such a thing, Doctor? Children are only able to deal with trauma such as this by departmentalizing it. Essentially, you packed up your pain and stored it away in a box, buried far in your subconscious. Otherwise, how could you go on living with your father and under such a threat? Why did it decide to return now, in flashes and nightmares? Perhaps because to move forward, to start your new life with Sylvie, you needed to let go of the past." The doctor raised his hands in the air. "We're still learning about the human brain. We can really only make assumptions and work with what we know. It was better when I couldn't remember. Knowing my father is a murderer and a bully doesn't release me from anything, it gets in the way." "No, you still knew it, only it was hidden. Whether it makes sense to you or not, the knowledge was influencing your decisions and emotions, even though you didn't realize it." Bailey rubbed his temples and closed his eyes. The dying man's face haunted him, as did the sweet face of his dear mother shining with tears. "What do I do with this knowledge now?" "Deal with it and lay it to rest. Tell me about your father. Is he still alive?" At that moment, an alarm sounded. "Time's up for today, I'm afraid," the doctor said. "Well, we can go a little overtime. My next appointment's not for a while." "No, I won't take advantage of your time, thank you, doctor. I have to get going myself." Bailey was pleased the time was up, because he had no knowledge with which to answer that last question of the doctor's. He had not seen his father for many years. His father had left his mother long ago, and Bailey never cared to ask questions of his whereabouts. If his father was alive, he had made no effort to contact him. Just before Bailey joined the Amish, his mother sent him an email with her new address, but he deleted his email account, and now he racked his brain trying to remember what she had said. He had only read it quickly since their relationship was strained, and he never paid much attention to any of her emails. Did she say she was going overseas for a time, or to visit someone somewhere? It was all hazy, and in what town did she now reside? Details like that did not stay in his brain, whereas his mind was like a steel trap if it was anything to do with a case on which he was working. He wondered what sort of parent he would be, since he hadn't had the best of childhoods. He wanted to be the sort of dad Jack was to his children. He would have to contact both his mother and his father to finally lay things to rest. But how would he do that? He hadn't heard from his father in years, and he had no idea where his mother lived. Crowley. Crowley, the local detective, could help him. He'd done Crowley favors in the past, surely Crowley could track down his parents. But he could not mention to Crowley that his father was a murderer. He might now have been convicted for the murder, or he could be in jail already for all Bailey knew. There were, however, two people he felt he could tell anything to, and those people were his two great-aunts, Elsa May and Eddie, his grandfather's sisters. He would talk to Detective Crowley, and then visit his old aunts. Chapter 9. Without counsel purposes are disappointed, but in the multitude of counselors they are established. Proverbs chapter 15 verse 22. The next day, after milking was over, Bailey borrowed the buggy to go into town. He peeped into Crowley's office and saw him behind his desk looking through some papers with a large coffee mug in his hand. Crowley looked up. "Rivers, what brings you here?" As Bailey approached his desk, he noticed that Detective Crowley's eyes ran up and down him. Bailey looked down at his clothes. "I guess this is the first time you've seen me in these Amish clothes." Crowley nodded. "So what brings you here?" Bailey sat down in the chair opposite the detective. "I'm hoping you'll be able to help me find my father and my mother." Crowley picked up a pen and a notepad. "Tell me more." Bailey took a deep breath and wondered where to begin. "I lost touch with my father when I left home years ago. My parents divorced when I was a teenager. My mother moves often. She gave me her most recent address by email, but when I joined the Amish I deleted my email account, forgetting about her email." Bailey shrugged. The detective nodded, and his forehead wrinkled while he jotted some notes. "Names of your parents?" Bailey gave Crowley his parents' names and last known addresses. "I'll look into it." Crowley threw the notepad down on his desk. "Are you trying to find them to invite them to your wedding?" Bailey smiled. "I haven't been close to them and wouldn't want them to come to the wedding. Well, maybe just my mother if she wanted to come." Crowley stared at Bailey and nodded slowly. "I'm not close to my family either. Tell me, how is it that you're related to Elsa May and Eddie?" "My grandfather was their brother. He left the community when he was a young man. He used to take me back to his old family farm, but he never took me to meet any of his relatives. I only met Elsa May and Eddie at his funeral. Someone told them that he had died and they came. They were the only ones who came from the community." Crowley chuckled. He mustn't have been too close to his family either. "Coffee?" "Yes, with cream and sugar, please." Crowley picked up his phone and asked the junior officer to make them coffee. When he set back the receiver he said, "Rivers, that's not an Amish name, is it?" "My mother's maiden name was Hilty. The Amish came down my mother's side. It was my mother's father who was Amish, his name was Jonah." Crowley scowled. "I find family history a waste of time." Bailey laughed. Instincts told him that Crowley would not be bothered with family. Bailey saw the detective as someone who lived a lonely life, someone who would go home to a cat and a TV dinner, maybe minus the cat. A cat would be too much bother for him. "Is your family from around here?" Crowley nodded. "Have you asked Elsa May and Eddie to see what they can find out?" "I'm just off to see them when I leave here." Crowley was just about to say something when a young constable came in with 2 coffees. "Here you go, sir." The young woman placed a coffee in front of Crowley and one in front of Bailey. She took up the empty coffee mug on Crowley's desk. "That'll be all for now, thanks, Jones." Once the dark-haired constable was out of the room, Crowley fixed his eyes back onto Bailey. "I didn't realize you've only just met your aunts. I thought you would have known them for years." Bailey took a mouthful of coffee and then said, "No. I found them so nice I didn't know why my granddad kept away from them for so long." After Crowley had swallowed his mouthful he said, "Why did your grandfather leave the Amish?" Bailey had to smile. Crowley had hit a sore spot. He wished he knew what happened to make his grandfather leave the Amish all those years ago. I have no idea, even his sisters don't seem to know why he left. Crowley said nothing and slurped his coffee loudly. Then Crowley leaned back into his high-backed swivel chair. Bailey placed his mug down on the desk after taking a sip. I've always meant to ask you. How did you come to know Elsa May and Eddie? They've helped me and I've helped them. Have done so for a number of years now. Bailey did not press Crowley for more information, figuring he'd find out another day. For now, the only thing he was interested in was finding his mother and his father. I won't hold you up. I'll give you the phone number of where I'm staying. It's my friend Jack's house. Bailey scribbled the number down and handed it to the detective. Very good, I'll look into it later today. Thanks, Crowley. I appreciate it. Bailey looked at the clock on the side of Detective Crowley's office. He had enough time to get to Elsa May and Eddie's house before he had to get the buggy back to Jack and Pamela. Bailey, this is a nice surprise. Elsa May, Bailey's here, Eddie called out to her older sister while pulling Bailey into the small house and shutting the door. Would you like some tea? Yeah, tea would be nice. Bailey sat in a hard wooden chair while Eddie disappeared into the kitchen. Elsa May flurried into the room. We gets. I'm well, Auntie, and you? Fine, what brings you here? I've a few questions for you and Eddie. Elsa May nodded. Well, we'll wait for Eddie to come back with the tea. How are you enjoying staying with Jack? Bailey's limbs still had not become accustomed to the hard work of the farm. He wondered how Jack could do it all, day in and day out. I'm enjoying staying there, but farming is hard work. My body still hasn't adjusted to the muscle demands or the long days. How does Jack do it, day in and day out? Even Pamela has a huge workload, and not just looking after the children. There are the pigs, the chickens, the vegetable garden to tend. I don't know how either one of them does it. The life of a farmer is a hard one, but it's good to bring children up on a farm so they can work hard and learn to cooperate with people. Eddie hurried in with a Troy holding a pot of tea and 3 cups and saucers. She set it down on a small table and began to pour the tea. I heard you say to Elsa May that you have questions for us. Eddie handed him his tea. Danka, Aunt, Bailey took a deep breath, balancing the tea on his knees. I've some questions about my grandfather and my parents. Elsa May and Eddie looked at each other. Is there something that you're not telling me? You haven't asked us anything yet, Elsa May said. Bailey wondered what they knew that they were being cagey about. He knew that they knew something. First thing I've always wanted to know is why did my grandfather leave the Amish and never go back to visit his family? Was he shunned? Elsa May glanced at Eddie and said, Nay, he wasn't shunned. Then why? He would take me back to his family's land, and we fished in the old creek. If he loved the land so much, why wouldn't he stop by to visit his family? Eddie opened her mouth to speak, but Elsa May butted in. He was stubborn. He made the decision to leave, and he might have thought if he went back, even just for a visit, someone might try and talk him into staying. Elsa May stared at him, and Bailey looked to Eddie, who put her teacup up to her lips and took a sip. He wondered if that were true, or was there something that they were leaving out? So he left, and sometime later he got married and had my mother? Bailey took a sip of tea. Elsa May said, We had no contact with him after he left. Your mother contacted us though, Eddie said. Elsa May turned and glared at her sister. Well, he's got a right to know, Elsa May. What's the use of keeping secrets from him after all this time? Elsa May pressed her lips together, and her eyes shot back to Bailey. All right. Your mother contacted us when you were 7 or 8. I think your grandfather told her where we lived. Yeah, and we don't know how he knew that because Elsa May and I had only just moved in to live with each other in this very house. Elsa May twisted her body toward her sister and frowned. Do you want to tell him, or shall I? You're always interrupting me. I didn't mean to interrupt, Elsa May. I just wanted to tell Bailey that bit. Elsa May sighed and continued, Your mother came here with you and we put you both up here for weeks. Bailey blinked hard. I stayed here. The elderly ladies both nodded. I have no memory of it at all. I thought the first time I met you two was at my grandfather's funeral. I did think the garden out the front looked familiar though. You played in the garden all the time. Your mother and father had a turbulent relationship. She didn't give us details, just said she couldn't stay with your grandfather because your father would have found you there, Eddie said. So she was scared of my father? Elsa May nodded. Seems so. Eddie added, that's what we thought. She knew that he would never find you here. Where did she go when she left here? Bailey asked. She left you here one day. She must have gone to speak to him because he drove her back here and she came in to get you. Your father waited in his car. She said that everything was sorted out and that he had changed, and he had made her promises. Elsa May leaned down and picked up her knitting. Bailey blew out a deep breath and his shoulders drooped. What do you know of your father? Eddie asked. I trust that I can confide in you too. The elderly ladies nodded. I've been having nightmares, which I've just learned are memories of my past replaying on my subconscious mind. I saw my father kill someone behind my house. I saw him, and remember he locked me in a cupboard for what could have been days, maybe weeks. I remember my mother crying for him to let me out. Eddie and Elsa May looked at him, open-mouthed. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to shock you, Bailey said, wondering if he should have kept the information to himself. Nay, that's quite all right. We thought that violence might have been involved, but we didn't know what to do about it, did we, Elsa May? Elsa May shook her head. Nay, now I wished we would have done something. We kept you in our prayers. Danka. Of course I didn't tell Crowley any of this, but I did go to see him to ask him to locate my parents, both of them. My mother emailed me her new address some time ago, but I closed down the email account. I haven't spoken to my father in probably 15 or even 20 years. I have no idea where he is. When you were working for the FBI, did you look up your father to see if he had a record of convictions? Elsa May asked. Bailey shook his head. These memories have only just surfaced. I've had bad dreams for years, but then these dreams became more frequent and clearer. I went to someone for hypnotherapy, and the images became clearer. Bailey rubbed his neck. He couldn't have a record, because my family history would have been looked into before I joined the FBI. What would you like Eddie and me to do? I'd do it myself, but I'm kind of caught up with helping Jack at the farm. I was hoping you could research old papers at the library, just on the off chance that there might be an article written about him. See if there's anything in the papers about him killing a man. Or anything about him at all. Covering what time period? Eddie asked. I can't even give you that. Apparently you two know more than I do. Of course we'll help out in any way we can, Elsa May said. Bailey smiled. Thank you. He took another sip of tea. He had Crowley working on finding his mother and father, and now he had his old aunties on the job of finding out about his father's history. I thought if I could speak to my father and my mother, I could finally put the pieces of my life together, Bailey said. His two aunts smiled at him. Bailey stood up. Well, thank you for the tea. I'd better get back to help Jack with the afternoon milking. Chapter 10. He that refuseth instruction despiseth his own soul, but he that heareth reproof getteth understanding. The fear of the Lord is the instruction of wisdom, and before honor is humility. Proverbs chapter 15 verses 32 to 33. Bailey headed back to the farm and wondered how Jack would cope without him when he wasn't there anymore. Before Bailey came to stay with him, Jack had employed local farmhands. Bailey was pleased to be able to help him out. He still had no idea what he would do after he married Sylvie. Maybe he could help Jack out for a little while longer. Bailey knew that Jack would have been pleased that he had 5 sons. Sons would grow up to be a real help to him on the farm. He turned the buggy off the road and into Jack's property and stopped to open the gate. Once he had closed the gate behind him, he set the horse clip-clopping down the long drive to the house. He passed the pig pens where he saw the children playing, then he passed the garden where Pamela was shoveling, and then he drove the buggy straight into the large barn. There you are. Jack was leaning over a wheelbarrow. I'll give you a hand. Jack helped Bailey unhitch the buggy, and then Bailey rubbed the horse down before putting him back into his stable. How old do the boys have to be before they can help with the milking? Bailey asked. Around 12, I'd say. I think I was around 11 or 12 when I started helping with the milking. They help Pamela feed the pigs, they feed the chickens and water the vegetables. They do a lot already. Joseph's nearly ready to come with us and watch what we do when he's not in school, of course. Yeah, but some of the cows can be dangerous, can't they? Bailey laughed. Some of them scare me sometimes. Mostly the young ones who've just had their calves taken away from them can be vicious. Jack laughed. That's why I do those ones. You know, the ones I put the leg rope on? I've seen you do that. You give me the easy ones? Do you want to have a go at some of the others? Bailey shook his head. I've enough trouble with the good ones. Jack chuckled and sent his black and white dog to fetch the cows. It never ceased to amaze Bailey that as soon as Jack gave the order, his dog ran to the cows and rounded them up from the lower field, and within minutes the cows were gathered in the upper field. Every now and again there was a stubborn cow that Jack would have to shoo up. As Bailey and Jack wandered to the stalls, Bailey's thoughts turned back to his aunts. Why did he have the feeling that they were still keeping some information from him? After Bailey left Elsa May and Eddie's house, Eddie shut the door and she and Elsa May looked at each other. Eddie was the first to speak. Why didn't you tell him? I thought you would have said something. Eddie shook her head, and they both wandered back to their chairs. It's a wonder no one in the community has told him by now, Eddie said. The only ones who would remember would be our age, and there aren't too many people left of our age. Elsa May leaned down and picked up her knitting from her knitting box by her feet. The bishop would know, but he has chosen not to tell him, so do you think it's a good idea that we tell him? Eddie asked. I think we should be the ones to tell him. We'll see what we can find out for him at the library, and next time we see him we'll tell him. Elsa May looked up from her knitting. Eddie nodded in agreement, then she took the tray of tea things back to the kitchen. When Bailey woke the next morning, he was pleased that he had not had one bad dream or one nasty flash before his eyes during the night. He seemed also to be awake before Jack, and that was a most rare occurrence. Bailey groaned as he stumbled into the kitchen. He clenched his eyes shut tight, then reached for the matches and lit a gas lamp. The lamp flooded the kitchen with light as it was still pitch black outside. Even that aggravating rooster wasn't up yet, which was a first since he had come to stay with Jack. It was only 4:30 in the morning. Bailey rummaged around until he found a sizable frying pan and set it on the stove, firing it up. While this time of the morning was completely alien to him, Jack and the kids would be starting their morning shortly. The children often woke at the same time as Jack to get their chores done before school. He pulled out the eggs and flour to make pancakes and some bacon, and set them out across the counter. He lined up strips of bacon in a pan, and let his mind drift as he mixed up the batter. He understood why Jack and the children would get up so early. It was a restful time of day. It was almost strange how quiet it was compared with the city. Bailey nearly jumped out of his skin as the stovetop coffee pot gave a loud click and grumble as it heated up. The silence of the morning made it sound as loud as an air horn in his ears. He took in several deep breaths, surprised to find that his heart pounded. As he ladled batter onto the hot pan, and the bacon sizzled and began to brown in its own pan, he heard the distant sound of feet shuffling upstairs. Outside, a dog barked and some of the cows made noises. Just like that, the magic of the early dawn disappeared, leaving the sound of the day starting. You're up early. Jack yawned as he made his way into the kitchen, already in faded work clothes and thick-collared shirt. He shuffled over to the coffee pot, eyeballing the fill line before pouring it into his favorite well-worn cup. Me. Bailey chuckled as he kept an eye on the bubbling cakes. You guys are the ones up early. I can't believe that I've gotten used to these early starts. I'm even starting to enjoy getting up before the sun's up. Gets easier with practice. Jack responded as he sipped the coffee. Lots of practice. And poor man's espresso, apparently. Bailey grinned, seeing Jack's extra black coffee. Jack frowned slightly and looked into his coffee as though he had something on his mind, and then he said, "Everything going all right with you, Bailey?" "Sure. Just a few more weeks until the wedding." "I have to admit that I'm nervous," Bailey said as he poked at the pancakes. "How do the kids like their eggs?" "They'll eat eggs any way you want to make them." Jack studied Bailey over his coffee cup. "Heard you calling out in your sleep during the night." Bailey poked at the pancakes as he spoke. "I didn't think I had any nightmares last night." "Yeah, you did. You settled pretty quickly. I decided not to wake you." Jack swished his drink in his mug. "You seem to have something bigger than the wedding on your mind lately." "Thank you for recommending that doctor to me. He seems to be helping." "Everyone needs a little help, every now and again." Bailey had to smile a little. That was Jack. Trying to solve the problems of the world, while looking after a farm and a family raising 5 bustling boys. Don't think there's much that can be done. Just got to let it run its course, I guess. Not sure what else I can do about it. What's been going on? I want to be rid of the dreams before Sylvie and I get married. But I don't know if that's going to happen. I'll just have to pray and hope that all turns out well. What are your dreams about? If you don't mind me asking. You got enough to fuss with without worrying about any of that, Bailey said quickly, flipping the golden pancakes onto a plate. To his relief, the conversation was interrupted by a stampede of feet barreling down the stairs. It was like a small hurricane of hands and feet, as kids scurried around checking lunches and eyeing the pancakes and bacon. Jack went into dad mode, calling out tasks and keeping one of the boys out of the utility room. Dishes were set. Butter and milk were on the table in record time over a dull roar of overlapping chatter. There was a rush of activity and noise as the children sat down at the table. Jack called for order, and Bailey was surprised how quickly the hush swept across the children. Bailey had already noticed how polite and well-behaved all the Amish children were, and Jack and Pamela's children were no exception. Bailey grinned at the scene. At least he would have Sylvie to help when it came time to raise young ones of his own. Pamela slept in, if you could call waking up at 6 a.m. sleeping in, until Jack left the house for the morning milking. Then she would take over watching the children and getting the older ones ready for school. A wail rang out, and Bailey whirled around to see that young Simon had fallen off his chair and grazed his skin on one knee. Jack rushed to his son. "Bailey, will you get me the iodine out of the utility room?" "Sure." Bailey hurried toward the room and opened the door. He stared into the small room, and was immediately drawn back into the past to a time where he was kept in a small room just like this one. "You stay in there, boy. Don't you make a sound now." Bailey's blood turned to ice as he could hear the voice as clear as day, yet he knew it was only in his mind. He knew what it was to feel trapped in a room as small as this one. He knew the feel of a rough wood floor under his hands. "That son of..." Bailey raked his hands into his hair, pulling hard to use the pain to bring him back to the present. "Bailey, the iodine." Bailey jolted back to the present. "Coming up." He looked around the utility room, and turned his attention to a high shelf with bottles of lotions and potions. "Got it." Bailey raced to Jack with a clean cotton wool swab and the bottle of iodine. Jack dabbed some on his son's knee. "There you go, as good as new. Now you lot finish off your breakfast and no more rocking on your chair, Simon." It took them no time at all to polish off their pancakes, and then they were out the door in a flash. Bailey poured Jack another cup of coffee. Jack always had 2 cups before starting his day. "What happened to you just now? Did you have another one of your flashes?" Bailey nodded. "He killed him, Jack." "What was that?" In a low voice so only he could hear, he told Jack that his nightmares were memories, and he told him what they were about. "He killed him. He killed." The disjointed dreams tormented him once more, replaying over in his mind. He had run from his father, but not fast enough. His father dragged him to a small room in the house and locked him in there for what could have been days, maybe even weeks. Memories from long ago, that's what my dreams were. I saw my father take the life of a man. I ran, my father caught me and locked me away for a time. Jack stared at Bailey with eyes wide open. "Did the doctor help you remember?" Bailey nodded. Chapter 11. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. John chapter 10 verse 10. Eddie and Elsa May took a 20-minute taxi ride to Lancaster Public Library. The taxi stopped outside the building, and they wasted no time getting into the building. They stood in front of the help desk and waited for someone to approach them. "Can I help you?" A young man dressed in gray with a large bow tie greeted them with a kind smile. Eddie spoke. "We are looking for some information about someone, and we want to look at some old newspapers." "Very good. From how long ago?" Elsa May and Eddie looked at each other. Eddie said, "We don't know an exact time, but we think maybe around 20 years ago." "Ah, pre-internet. I'll have someone help you." The young man disappeared, and then a small lady with silver glasses and dark hair tied back on her head approached them. "Milton tells me you ladies are after information from an old newspaper?" "Yes, around 20 years ago we're guessing, and not one particular newspaper. We're trying to find out information about someone, and we're hoping he might have been mentioned in a newspaper or two." "Well, you might be in luck. Pennsylvania has started a newspaper project. It began in 1983, and their aim is to preserve and collate all the old newspapers in Pennsylvania." "What a good idea," Eddie said. "It's a little complex. It's not only web-based, some of it is on microfiche and some on microfilm. Give me the details, and I'll be able to see if the article you're looking for is going to be easy to find." "Is it an article that you're looking for?" Both ladies nodded. "Come this way." They followed the tiny librarian to an alcove. They all sat while she switched on a large desktop computer. "What details can you give me on your article?" "We're after information on a man named Denman Nigel Rivers. Possibly might be linked to a murder." The librarian tapped into the keyboard, and did not flinch a bit when Elsa May mentioned the word murder. "Here we go, first try. It's catalogued on one of the databases. I'll print the article out for you." "Is there only one article?" Elsa May asked. "I'll see. I'll try a different kind of a search." After 10 more minutes of looking, the librarian said, "I found 2 more articles. While they're printing, I'll search some more." Over the librarian's shoulder, Eddie and Elsa May saw that Bailey's father's name was in the same article as the word murder. It was as Bailey had suspected. The librarian said, "That seems to be all there is. If you know that there was another article written, I could email someone from the search project and have them look into it if you wish." "No, we don't know anything for sure, do we, Elsa May?" Elsa May shook her head. "Now, where do we get those printed articles from?" "They go to the printer behind my desk. I'll get them for you." 2 minutes later, the librarian came back and handed some sheets of paper to Eddie and to Elsa May. "I printed out 2 lots so you could each have a copy. Is there anything else I can do for you?" Eddie said, "No, dear. You've been a wonderful help. Thank you very much." "Yes, you've been outstanding." Elsa May smiled at the librarian. "Thank you. I enjoy that part of my job." When the librarian went back to her reception desk beside the young man in the bow tie, Elsa May said, "Quick, let's find a seat somewhere. I can't wait to read what these say." They hurried toward one of the many tables and chairs in the middle of the library. Elsa May and Eddie sat and read the articles at the same time. Elsa May tapped her chin with her fingertip. "Says here that Bailey's dad was suspected of murder. Says in this one here that he was let off the charges when it was found that the man who died had threatened him and his family. Well, we already knew that Bailey's father was a prison guard, and it says here that the man was a newly released prisoner out to take revenge on Denman. Do you think Bailey knew what his father did for a living?" Eddie asked. "Bailey thinks that he was a traveling salesman. That's what Liz told him years ago." Eddie cast her eyes back over the 3 articles. It appears that he was arrested and never charged. When that man got out of prison, he must have turned up at the house and then a struggle broke out. We should have told him about his grandfather, Elsa May said. Yeah, it will be hard to tell him about this and his grandfather. We'll have to do it. We should have told him the other night that we knew his father was a prison guard. We'll have to call tomorrow and have him come to our house. Being part of Jack and Pamela's family scene often made Bailey wonder what kind of parents he and Sylvie would be. Having a family of his own had always been a tentative point with Bailey, considering his own childhood. His traumatic upbringing had not put him off the idea entirely. He knew he had to put his past behind him, which was something he couldn't do until he found out the truth about everything. Hello, Crowley. It's Rivers, Bailey Rivers. Bailey, hello. Any news? Have you found anything out? Bailey asked. I haven't been able to locate your father, but I do have a phone number and an address for your mother. Do you have a pen? Yes. Bailey wrote the address. Crowley began quoting all the previous addresses where his mother had lived over the past several years. When he was finished, Bailey was silent on the line. Bailey? Hello, are you there? Crowley called down the line. Yeah, just let me know when you find out anything new. Thanks for your help, I appreciate it. Bailey held his mother's phone number tightly in his hand. He could not bring himself to call her right away. He would wait to speak with Elsa May and Eddie before calling her. He placed the paper with his mother's number in his room and went back out into the sunshine. As he paced across the field that bordered his friend's home, Bailey was struck by the distinct lack of bustle that was the norm of city life. Breathing in a deep lungful of crisp country air, Bailey found himself appreciating country life. He had lived so long surrounded by busy streets and concrete buildings, he had never given much thought to any other way of life. Bailey decided to focus his thoughts on Sylvie. He missed her terribly, spending such an amount of time away from her was taking its toll. He took comfort from thoughts of when they would be man and wife. His anger at his father, not only for what he was but for how badly he treated him as a child, played heavily on his mind, and he worried about his mother's well-being. Bailey knew he could not truly rest until these issues were settled. Bailey often wondered what he would say to his father if he ever found himself face to face with the man. But he was not an Englisher now, so he could not think like an Englisher. Bailey was now Amish, and he had to find forgiveness in his heart for everyone who had wronged him. Now noting his lack of attention to his surroundings and onward direction, Bailey found himself nearing the border of a dense woodland area. Not wanting to venture too far, he changed his direction, heading toward the main barn. When Bailey made his way back to the pens for the afternoon milking, Jack was waiting outside the barn waving at him. That's odd, I'm not late or anything, I wonder what's happened. Bailey picked up his pace and jogged toward Jack. All okay. It's that detective friend of yours. He said to call him back and that it's urgent. You call him, I'll start the milking. I won't be far away, Bailey said as he headed toward the phone in the barn. Yes, Crowley. It's Rivers here. Ah, yes. I've come across some interesting news. What did your father do for a living? He was a salesman. He was a traveling salesman, I guess. He was away a fair bit. Why do you ask? Denman Nigel Rivers, and there can't be many people with that name, was a corrections officer in the state of Pennsylvania in the years 1980 to 1991. He was what? Are you sure? Why would they tell me he was a salesman? Crowley's voice murmured in the background, but Bailey was not listening to what he was saying. Where is he? Have you found him? No, but I've got a lead I'm working on. Hopefully, I'll find out tomorrow. Bailey's mind wandered once more. On the last case on which he'd worked, he had cause to go to a correctional facility, and he had found it familiar. Could it have been the jail in which his father had worked? Or had he visited his father in prison while he was serving a jail term, perhaps for murder? What correctional facility did he work at? Just a moment. Western State, Pittsburgh. That was the same one that Bailey had been to, where he had remembered the visitor's room. Thank you once again. Please let me know the moment you locate him. Surely, if his dad had any criminal convictions, that would have been the first thing that Crowley would have been able to find out, and Crowley did not mention that his father had any criminal convictions. As Bailey hung up the phone's receiver, he remembered when he was 14, and learned that his mother and father were getting a divorce. From there, Bailey lived with his mother, leaving home at 18. After that, Bailey was consumed by his job in the police force. It was not unusual for Bailey to go months without contacting his mother, or without her contacting him. Bailey had not spoken to his father since the divorce, and neither did he wish to. His sole purpose in contacting his father now was to have some questions answered. Bailey was on his way out of the barn when he heard the phone ring. He picked it up, wondering if it would be Crowley again. It was Elsa May and Eddie calling him from the library. They asked him to meet with them at their house tomorrow. They said they had other things to tell him, other than what they had found out at the library. I was right, I knew they had been keeping something from me, Bailey thought. Chapter 12. Good and upright is the Lord, therefore will he teach sinners in the way. The meek will he guide in judgment. And the meek will he teach his way. Psalm chapter 25 verses 8-9. Bailey arrived at Elsa May and Eddie's house. He had resisted pleading with them yesterday to tell him what they had found out over the phone. Something told him whatever they were going to tell him was best said face to face. Come in, Bailey. Bailey sat down, and Elsa May and Eddie showed him the newspaper articles they had gotten from the library. Bailey scratched his chin. So it was self-defense. Says here that he was protecting his family, and that the man he killed had threatened him and his family. He was protecting Mom and me. It's a lot to take in. There's more, Elsa May said. About your grandfather, Jonah, Eddie added. What? Tell me. Your grandfather didn't leave the community, he ran away, Elsa May said. Eddie picked up the story. He ran away with the bishop's daughter, who was betrothed to someone else. Bailey looked from one to the other. Was the bishop's daughter my grandmother? They both nodded. So they were both shunned? Bailey asked. Your grandmother was shunned. She'd been baptized into the community, but your grandfather hadn't been for some reason, Elsa May said. She was the bishop's only daughter, and her mother never recovered from her daughter leaving her and never being able to speak to her again, Eddie said. What happened to my grandmother? Bailey had no memory of her. His grandfather had told him that she had died many years ago, but he never said how she died. Died in childbirth while giving birth to your mother, Eddie said with a kindly hand on his shoulder. When the bishop's wife found out, she cursed your grandfather and his whole family, Elsa May said. Bailey frowned. I thought the Amish were a forgiving people. She was consumed with uncontrollable grief. Some say that she went mad, Elsa May said. Bailey thought about the bishop who had helped ease him into the community and given him encouragement. Is this current bishop related to the old one? Elsa May said, when a bishop dies, lots are cast between the ministers, and the lot fell on the man who is now the current bishop. As you should know, Bailey, that's the way things are done. Bailey thought back to his instruction, his lessons of Amish life he'd been given. He vaguely remembered something about Amish men having to be willing to take up leadership positions in the community if the lot fell on them. Being a former Englisher, he knew he would never hold such a position, so he hadn't taken much notice of that aspect of the instruction. Why didn't you tell me this before? We didn't want you to think that you might be cursed, Elsa May said, jutting out her bottom jaw. Bailey grunted. Might explain a few things. It certainly explains why my grandfather stayed away from the community. Eddie shook her head. Nay, he would not have wanted to show his face around these parts. Not after stealing away the bishop's daughter. James Byler, the man she was to marry, was devastated as well, but he married a couple of years later, Elsa May said. Bailey looked back to the newspaper articles again. There were witnesses who heard this man threaten his father and his father's family. There were other prisoners who came forward, and some of his father's fellow workers at the prison, who had heard the man threaten his father. It was possible that his father was protecting his family, and had to kill the man in self-defense. Maybe fear led him to threaten Bailey and lock him in a cupboard. Bailey screwed up his face. Whatever way he looked at it, he found it hard to excuse his father for such cruelty. Bailey lowered the articles and looked up at his two aunts. Grandfather stole away the bishop's daughter, who then died in childbirth having my mother. My mother married my father, who had a bad temper, and was a corrections officer who killed a man in apparent self-defense. Bailey looked at Eddie and Elsa May. Eddie said. Ah, that will fix everything, Elsa May said sarcastically, making a face at her sister. Bailey laughed. I'll need something stronger than tea, Eddie. My father had a violent temper, it appears, and was a very hard man. I wonder how my mother managed to cope with it all. She never mentioned growing up without a mother, and how it had affected her. It must have affected her in many ways. My grandfather told me nothing about my grandmother. Too much pain, too many secrets, Eddie said. You two kept secrets from me, Bailey said. They weren't ours to tell, Bailey, Elsa May said. I wonder if I'm cursed. Bailey slumped down in the chair. Cursed by my own great-grandmother. Go and see the bishop, Eddie suggested. Bailey nodded slowly. I think that will be my next stop. Bailey said goodbye to his aunts and stopped by the bishop's place, hoping the bishop might be free to speak to him. The bishop was free, and Bailey sat and told him all that had happened to him in the past and all that he was troubled by. So, do you think that I could be cursed, me and my future children? Are things like that real? The bishop rubbed his dark beard between his thumb and his forefinger. Our teachings are that whoever does not obey their father and mother will be condemned and lost. The scripture says to obey your father and mother, so all will be well with you. You have confessed your sins, Bailey, and God has counted you as righteous, as a sheep that has gone astray and has wandered back into the fold. You are not accountable for the sins of any of your relatives. I see, but what about a curse? Eddie said that the old bishop's wife cursed my grandmother and her descendants. The scripture says we are to bless those who curse us. I know, but you see, the lady's dead now, the old bishop's wife, but would her curse live on? The bishop chuckled. What has happened to you is just life. The rain falls on the just and the unjust. Submit yourself to God and trust in Him. Whatever happens to you from here on is God's will. I think I understand, but I'm not sure. The bishop stared at Bailey for a moment. Let me read something to you from Matthew. He took up his large black Bible and flipped through the pages. Here we are, it's in Matthew 5 verses 44 and 45. But I say unto you, love your enemies, bless them that curse you, do good to them that hate you, and pray for them which despitefully use you and persecute you. That ye may be the children of your Father which is in heaven, for he maketh his sun to rise on the evil and on the good, and sendeth rain on the just and on the unjust. The bishop closed his Bible. Bailey was not used to having his questions answered by scriptures. So whatever comes my way, have love and forgiveness in my heart. The bishop put his index finger high in the air. You've got it. Bailey laughed and felt like a load had lifted from him. He realized he probably should have come to see the bishop with his problems a lot earlier. The bishop held up the Bible in his left hand. There is power in these words. These words are the Word of God. The Word of God is quick and powerful and sharper than any two-edged sword, piercing even to the dividing asunder of soul and spirit, and of the joints and marrow, and is a discerner of the thoughts and intents of the heart. The bishop chuckled again. They aren't just words, Bailey. When you feel weak, read the Word of God and He will give you strength. Chapter 13. For I know the thoughts that I think toward you, saith the Lord, thoughts of peace, and not of evil, to give you an expected end. Jeremiah chapter 29 verse 11. It had been a torrid few months for Bailey. He couldn't remember which one, but he knew that one of his doctors had told him that when a trauma weighs on one's mind for so long, it becomes a part of that person. Much work would need to be done to free that person and make him whole. According to the bishop, Bailey was already whole. He had to trust in God and accept that wholeness. Bailey thanked the good Lord for Sylvie often. If a man needed a reason to fix himself, to work hard, to dream good dreams once more, it was Sylvie. And Bailey knew she would be able to plug the hole, fill the vacuum, as she already had filled his heart. God was indeed good to give him a woman such as Sylvie. How would Sylvie feel about him if she found out about all he'd been keeping from her? What if she learned about all his darkest secrets? Bailey sensed that Sylvie knew something was wrong with him, yet she never pried or made him feel the pressure of her need to know. Still, Shouldn't he put her out of her misery now and come clean before the wedding? Didn't she deserve that? Didn't he owe her at least that? It was clear that Sabrina knew something was wrong, so how much more would Sylvie know it? Bailey had spent the day and previous night wondering, should he give her the chance to make an informed decision, the chance to change her mind about marrying him? But what if she did choose to change her mind? How would he even broach the subject? She would want to know why he hadn't been honest with her in the first place. She would demand that question answered, surely. Bailey strolled around the farm after his chores, kicking stones, fiddling with twigs until they fell broken to the ground, waiting for Jack to return from the market. Pamela was inside cooking, but Bailey stayed outside, not wanting to make a nuisance of himself. Maybe Jack could listen to his thoughts, help him make sense of them before he met Sylvie. Jack might advise him on what to do. When Bailey looked up, he saw Jack's buggy coming down the road alongside the perimeter of the property. The buggy stopped near the house, and one of the children leapt from the buggy and ran towards Bailey. "Bailey, Bailey. Come inside with us." The boy ran inside the house ahead of Bailey. "I'll be right in," Bailey called, jogging toward the door, joining the boy in his excitement. "Hey Bailey, sorry we're running late," Jack said as 3 boys ran ahead of him. He lumbered several cumbersome purchases through the yard from the buggy. "You said earlier you wanted a word. Come, let's eat while we chat." "I will. Danka." Bailey reached Jack. "Let me help you with all that. Looks like a heavy load." I'm fine with this lot. But there's more in the buggy. If you could just bring that in, I'll get Pamela to make us tea." Jack sniffed the air. "Smells like Pammy's just made bread." Bailey unloaded provisions, and then sat with Jack on the porch to eat the freshly made warm bread. On his mind was only one matter: what, if anything, should he admit to Sylvie? Was his confession worth losing her? "So what time will you be going up to Sylvie's?" Jack asked. "Soon. I just wanted a word with you beforehand, if that's okay. And bread too, of course." Jack grinned, crumbs on his chin. "Of course." Bailey swallowed a delicious bite of his hot buttered bread. "The thing is, I'm feeling much better since the nightmares have lessened. Everything looks better after a few good nights' sleep." Jack munched on his bread. "Still, it's mighty good to hear you say it, Bailey." Bailey and Jack shared a knowing nod. "Down to you too, Jack. If you hadn't referred me to the good doctor." "Hey, now I don't know about that." Jack blushed a little and looked at his food. Pamela interrupted them when she brought 2 cups of tea to them. "Danka Pamela," Bailey said. "Danka Pammy," Jack said, looking adoringly at his wife. Pamela smiled at them both and hurried back inside to the children. Jack turned his attention back to Bailey. "I'm glad your nightmares have lessened. Thanks to the doctor you recommended. The thing is, you're wondering whether to tell Sylvie? Or have you already told her?" "Well, that's why I wanted to speak to you." "I haven't, no. Not yet. But I mean, everything's done, finished. I'm no longer haunted, so is it wise to risk losing her for no good reason?" "It's your decision." Jack set down his thick slice of buttered bread and wiped his mouth on his napkin. "But I very much doubt she would leave you. After all, you have something to tell her now. Before you had no knowledge of what was happening, and now you do. You'll be presenting her with the cold hard facts, with information about a man she greatly loves." Bailey allowed Jack's words to spin around his mind. "What I mean is, now you can confess those facts, share what's been ailing you, knowing you've conquered what you feared." Bailey's eyes widened as the penny dropped. His chest expanded and a grin stretched his mouth. He hadn't thought of it like that at all. "You have a fine way of looking at things, Jack. You've inspired me to tell her everything, so we can be married without burdens or secrets, and it will be a better occasion because of it." He finished his bread and then stood to leave. "Wish me well." They shook hands and Jack said, "Sylvie's a good woman and she will love you all the more for your confession. And I'm not using the buggy today, so take it." Bailey tipped his hat in thanks, left Jack, and began the drive to Sylvie's house. He smiled all the way there, though bubbles of nervousness occasionally burst and gave him indigestion. When he arrived and climbed down from the buggy, he straightened his hat and took a deep breath. This is it. The door swung open and Sylvie stood in the doorway. Chapter 14. I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that ye present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service. And be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that ye may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. Romans chapter 12 verses 1-2. Sylvie had known for quite some time that all was not right with Bailey, and it wasn't just the things that Sabrina had put into her mind. Ever since he moved into the community, she had felt a barrier between them. She could not put her finger on exactly what it was. The only thing that would make sense was that he no longer wished to marry her. She knew people changed when they came into the community from having grown up English. Maybe he had changed and no longer wished to be betrothed. That had to be it. When Sylvie had seen Bailey driving toward her house in Jack's buggy, she hoped that he was not coming to tell her he no longer wished to be married. Her heart was fearful that it was so. She forced a smile and stepped onto the porch with him. "Can we talk?" Bailey asked. "Yeah, Sabrina's at work, so we are alone." Sylvie figured she might as well know sooner rather than later. She knew by the seriousness of his face that he was here to say something important. Once they were seated on the porch, Sylvie said, "What is it, Bailey? You look troubled." "I am troubled, Sylvie. I don't know where to begin." "Just start anywhere." Bailey nodded and looked to the floor. "I found out a lot of things that I didn't know." "About your grandfather?" "I'll start with my grandfather. He wasn't shunned as I'd begun to think. He left the community with the bishop's, well, the bishop's back then daughter. She was betrothed to someone else, and she shocked everyone when she ran away with my grandfather. She was shunned from her family. My grandfather was not officially shunned because he had never been baptized, but he was not welcome." Sylvie nodded. "That's not all. My grandmother died in childbirth while having my mother. The bishop's wife heard about it and cursed my grandfather and his lineage. That means I am cursed and my children are cursed." "Bailey, I've never heard such a thing. Curses like that aren't real." "I've spoken to the bishop and we had a good talk about things." "What did he say about curses?" "He quoted a lot of scripture. Love those that curse you, but I guess that corresponds to people who say mean things. I don't know if it means curse the way the old bishop's wife would have meant it." "I didn't know the old bishop or his wife. They both had died before I came to this community. I did hear talk that she was troubled." "I don't think curses can hurt you if you have goodness in your heart," Sylvie said with her hand lightly on top of Bailey's. "Sylvie, I'm worried about you and me." Sylvie took a deep breath and steeled herself against what she had expected. "Go on." "More accurately, I worry about our children that we might have. My father was a hard man and gave me harsh punishments. I've had nightmares and images of terror during the day. I saw him kill a man with his bare hands." Sylvie gasped and put her hands to her mouth, horror overtaking the flash of relief that he'd said, "Our children." They called it manslaughter, and he was not convicted, and it never went to trial. He was a prison guard, and the man was an ex-con who was threatening Dad and Mom and me. He must have found out where we lived and come onto our property. Anyway, I saw what my father did to him. My father turned around and saw me and chased me." Sylvie grimaced. "He grabbed me and locked me in a cupboard for I'm not sure how long, days at least. My mother continually cried and begged him to let me out." Bailey looked across at Sylvie. Tears streamed down her cheeks. Bailey held her hand. "Sylvie, I'm worried that I don't know how to be a good dad because I never had a good dad. I knew harshness from my father, and though my mother was sweet, there was a feeling of no connection. I haven't talked to either of them in years. I do have my mother's new phone number and I plan to phone her soon." "That's good. I know that when I was younger my mother told me that my father was a salesman, to explain all his absences, I'd say. They often separated, and then my dad would come back after a time. Theirs was a turbulent relationship." Bailey ran a hand through his hair. "Sylvie, I don't want that for you or me, and that's all I've seen. What about since you've stayed with Jack and Pamela?" Theirs would be a good model of a relationship for you to see. Yeah, they have a good life together, but it's under the surface of me that I'm worried about, what lies within. Bailey, you are nothing like your dad. I know that I'm not, Sylvie, but I have a fear that something of him lurks inside me. I can't risk you, Sylvie. What do you mean? I can't risk that I might hurt you one day, emotionally hurt you. What if I turn into what my father was? Sylvie was quiet for a moment. What he said was not making sense to her. Are you saying that you don't want to marry me? Ah, it's you, Bailey. I wondered who owned that buggy. Sylvie and Bailey looked up to see Sabrina flounce her way toward them. Sorry, am I interrupting something? Sabrina asked as she stopped not far from them. Hello, Sabrina. Nay, I was just leaving. Bailey stood up. Sylvie frowned. She had to know right now what he intended on doing. Did he want her or not? The dresses were made, and so were the suits. All the preparations for the wedding were done, besides that it was only weeks away. She knew she would be devastated if he did not want her now, after all that they had been through together. She took a deep breath, and was determined not to cry in front of him if he said that he no longer wished to marry her. I'll walk you to the buggy. Once they were standing next to the buggy, Sylvie looked back to the house to make sure Sabrina could not hear a word that she was about to say, but Bailey spoke first. Can you ever forgive me for keeping something from you? Bailey's words were spoken softly. I would have preferred that you tell me, but of course I forgive you, Sylvie said. Sylvie took a deep breath and spoke her words quickly. Bailey, are you trying to say that you do not want to marry me? Bailey took hold of her hand. Nothing in this world would give me greater pleasure than to marry the sweetest, kindest woman in the world. Sylvie's bottom lip trembled, and she shut her eyes tightly to keep away a rush of sudden tears. Sylvie, don't cry. Bailey put his arm around her. Sylvie took a deep breath. I thought you were going to say that you didn't want to marry me. Bailey took Sylvie in his arms. If I had sense, I might decide you deserve someone better than me. He tipped her face up towards him. I love you more than life itself. I was sharing my fears with you. I thought you should know what you are getting yourself into. Perfect love casts out fear, scripture says. Bailey held Sylvie tightly in his arms, and Sylvie did not care if Sabrina was staring out the window at them. She was pleased to be held tightly by the man she loved. I can't blame my grandfather for doing what he did. I know what it's like to love a woman so much that you would do anything for her, anything to have her. If you were betrothed to someone else, I'd steal you away if I had the chance. I guess I can't blame my dad for his harshness either. I don't know what was in his past to make him behave as he did. As for my mother, I guess she switched off her emotions so she wouldn't get hurt. No one's perfect. Everyone has flaws, Sylvie managed to say, even though Bailey was holding her tightly around her waist. Why are you crying so much? Bailey asked. I thought you were going to tell me that you didn't want to marry me. These are tears of relief. I knew there was something troubling you, and it scared me. Bailey cupped her face in his hands. I've been trying to get better these past months for us. I don't know if I ever would have faced what was troubling me, if it weren't for you. I want everything to be wonderful for us, and I don't want anything to stand in the way of our happiness. Sylvie tried to nod, then giggled a little. Forgive me if I've neglected you while trying to sort myself out. Of course I forgive you. I understand that what you've done is for me. Next time, will you let me know what troubles you? I will, sweet Sylvie. I will. Bailey held her in his arms, and then stepped back a little from her and looked her in the eyes. What do you think of the curse? Sylvie stepped a pace toward him. I don't believe that curses are real. I guess if I was cursed I wouldn't have found you, would I? Bailey smiled. We're both blessed to find each other. Bailey hugged Sylvie tightly for a moment longer. I'd better get this buggy back to Jack. I'll stop by and see you tomorrow. Sylvie stepped back and watched him travel back down the driveway. She glanced at the house only to wonder what smart-mouthed thing Sabrina would have to say when she stepped through the door. I hope he didn't leave early because of me, Sabrina said when Sylvie finally walked back inside the house. Nay, he had to get the buggy back. He's a good man, Sylvie. You will be happy together. Really? I thought you didn't like him. I thought that he was hiding something from you, but I think he just told you what it was. Did he? Sabrina stared at her with an eyebrow slightly raised. How would you know such a thing? People are always so easy to read, Sabrina said. Thanks for saying so. I mean about him being a good man. Your approval means a lot to me. It does. Sabrina drew her eyebrows down into a frown. Sylvie gave a little laugh. It would be a strained household when he comes to live here if you still didn't like him. Yeah, about that, Sylvie. I think I should move out. I like Bailey and everything, but it would be better if you two had your space. Don't you think? I don't. I've already told you that if Mom and Dad know you're living alone, they will force you back to Ohio with them. I will see what happens with my job. They still haven't given me full-time yet, but I'm sure they will. Sylvie slumped into the couch. Make me a cup of tea, would you, Sabrina? Bailey knew it was time to call his mother. He took the phone number from his room and went into the barn to make his call. She answered right away. Mom? Bailey. You took a long time to call me. Sorry, Mom. I canceled my email account and lost your number and your address. Bailey said. He took a deep breath before continuing. I'm living in Lancaster County at the moment, and I'm wondering if I might meet you somewhere. I can't. Zelda and I are going on a cruise for 6 weeks and leaving tomorrow. What about after that? She asked. Yes, I remember you telling me about your friend Zelda. Bailey didn't tell his mother of his intention of joining the Amish or his upcoming wedding to Sylvie. Fine, Mom. What is it, Bailey? Is there something wrong? I found out what Dad did for a living and found out about the man he killed. There was silence at the other end of the phone. Mom? I'm here. I was only trying to protect you by not telling you. I hope you're not mad at me. No, Mom, of course not. Your father got a lot of threats from the prisoners, hazard of the job, I suppose. But I got threatening phone calls, and this time, before that man came to the house, I knew that I was being followed. Once I had someone run me off the road. You were in the car too. The next day that man came to the house. He had a knife and your dad got it off him, and they struggled and your father accidentally killed the man. Bailey's memories were that he had strangled him, but he did not want to say that to his mom. Your dad lost 2 fingers in the fight. He got the knife off him by grabbing it. Bailey thought back to his father's 2 missing fingers. Bailey's father had always told him that they got sucked into the wringer when he'd been squeezing water out of the clothes. Are you all right to talk about this, Mom? His mom sighed. I should have told you long ago. How did I come to be locked in a cupboard? You saw your father fighting the man and then you ran. Your father chased you, carried you back to the house and locked you in. At first you wouldn't stop screaming. I begged him to let you out, but he didn't want you to see all the police and the ambulance that would be coming. Noticing his mother's voice shaking, Bailey said, You can tell me another time, you don't have to tell me now. No, best I tell you now and we can both forget about it. I never like to think about it. He threatened you to keep quiet, and then you were quiet for a while. The police came, then the paramedics took him to the hospital, and the body of the man was taken away. He wouldn't let me let you out of the cupboard, and I was too scared to cross him. His mother was quiet for a while, then spoke again. The first day he went back to work after that, I left him. I took you and went to your granddad's sister's house. Your granddad gave me the address and said I'd be safe there. Then you went back to him, after you left him for a time? Yes, we were always on and off, he and I. He would leave and then the next time I would be the one to leave. Tell me, Mom, did I ever go to the jail where Dad worked? He took you there. Sometimes they had children from juvenile centers visit the prison to show them that it wasn't a good place to be. Your father wanted to show you the same. He wanted to show you what it was like, so you wouldn't ever end up in a place like that. Bailey did not know what to say. Would he be able to be a good parent if he had no good role models? Perhaps he could behave the opposite of how his parents had behaved. Sorry I didn't tell you the truth sooner, Bailey. How long was I in that cupboard? There was a lengthy silence. Only hours, and that was the only time your father ever did that. Bailey took a deep breath and wondered if that could possibly be true. Doesn't matter now. You have a good time on your cruise. I'll have a lot to tell you when you get back. Bailey hung up the phone. He had always been closer to his grandfather than he had to either of his parents. At the next widows' meeting, Sylvie made sure she got there before Maureen and Emma. Come in, Sylvie. Sylvie handed Eddie some coconut cookies. Mostly everyone brought some tasty treat with them for their get-togethers. I want to speak with both of you before Maureen and Emma get here. The three ladies sat in the living room and Sylvie began. Bailey has told me everything. Everything about his childhood and about his grandfather. How is Bailey? Elsa May asked. He's better now that he's told me everything. I knew something was troubling him, and I thought that he might have changed his mind about me. Nay, his mother and he had it tough with his father, Elsa May said. And he witnessed a terrible thing for a child, Sylvie said. Eddie pursed her lips. We're sorry we didn't tell you when you asked us. You knew there was something troubling him, didn't you? Sylvie nodded. Is there anything you wanted to say to us? Eddie asked. Nay, just wanted to let you know before the other two get here that he's told me everything. I didn't want to mention it in front of Emma and Maureen, because I haven't told them anything about Bailey's troubles. Chapter 15. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. John chapter 10 verse 10. People overflowed Sylvie's small house on the morning of her wedding. He's coming, Sabrina called out to Sylvie from the door of her bedroom. Sylvie looked out her window and saw Bailey arriving in Jack's buggy. Her heart thumped wildly. The day she'd been looking forward to for months was finally here. You look beautiful, Sylvie, Sabrina said as she straightened Sylvie's prayer cap. Danka, sister. It's hard to believe this day is here. I'll go down and see what help I can be downstairs. You come down when you're ready. When Sabrina left her room, Sylvie raced to the window and watched Bailey walk to the house in the black suit that she had made for him. Sylvie made her way downstairs. All her furniture had been moved out of her house, and in its place were rows and rows of wooden benches. Sylvie looked out her front door and saw Bailey speaking to the bishop. He turned his head and saw Sylvie and smiled. The bishop noticed his distraction and turned to look at Sylvie. The bishop said something to Bailey, and they both smiled. Then the bishop walked toward the house with him. The bishop diverted to speak to someone, and Bailey continued to walk toward Sylvie. They met in the middle of the floor, and Sylvie had no words as she looked up into his face. You are beautiful, Sylvie. I'm so happy that you will soon be my wife, Bailey said. Sylvie giggled. Me too. 2 hours later, after a sermon from the bishop and some hymns, the bishop performed the ceremony, and Bailey and Sylvie were pronounced married. Bailey gave Sylvie a quick peck on the lips that surprised a few people, and that was the end of the ceremony and the beginning of the rearranging of the room for the wedding feast. Bailey led Sylvie outside. There were people outside listening to the service, as they could not fit inside the house. Is that Detective Crowley over there? I invited him. Where is he? Bailey said, and followed the direction in which Sylvie was pointing. It's my father. I mean, Detective Crowley is standing next to my father. Bailey turned to Sylvie. You stay here. As Bailey walked toward his father, Crowley walked away. Even though Bailey was filled with negativity and resentment toward his father, he was still pleased to see him there. His father was thinner and a little grayer, but there was no doubt that this man was his dad. His father extended his hand. Son, congratulations. You've turned out just like your granddad. Bailey shook his hand. How did you know about the wedding? I haven't even told Mom. Crowley found me. I asked the right questions and here I am. I'll get to the point of why I'm here. I'm here to apologize to you for being a bad father. I knew you'd turn out all right. You were always a good kid. I was? You locked me in a cupboard. I've only just stopped having nightmares about that. Bailey immediately regretted his words. His father had come to apologize, not to have his wrongdoing rubbed in his face. Bailey's wounds were deep and they were too fresh to speak to his father, but since his father had made the effort, so too should he. I accept your apology. Thank you, son. That means a lot to me. I know this isn't the place for it, but if you ever need to know about the man, well, if you ever have questions about certain things, I'll answer your questions. Bailey nodded, knowing his father was right. Today was neither the time nor the place. You said I was a good kid? Yes. Why did you take me to the jail and show me around it? His father breathed out heavily. I wanted you to stay on the right track. I wanted you to know about consequences. He scratched his head. I know that's rich coming from me, but I did want you to have a good life. I'm not the same person I was all those years ago. I've got regrets. I've got a lot of regrets. Bailey could see that his father's words were genuine. There's someone I want you to meet. His father looked down. I better get going. No, Dad. I want you to meet Sylvie, my wife. Bailey waved to Sylvie, motioning for her to come over. You've gone back to the Amish just like your granddad. You were always like two peas in a pod, you and he. After Sylvie met Bailey's father, he said, I'd better go. I just came to say what I just said and wish you all the best. Congratulations to the both of you. I'm glad you came, Dad. Bailey's dad handed him a card with his name and address, and then he walked away. Sylvie and Bailey stood and watched him drive away in his car. Bailey turned to Sylvie. I am glad he came. I feel light now. I've spoken to my mother and my father. There are no dark secrets now. I'll tell you the things he said to me later. I feel I have a clean, fresh start. You trusted in God, he never fails. Sylvie smiled and interlocked her fingers in his for just a moment. Then they walked back toward their wedding celebration. Blinking back tears, Bailey was overwhelmed with feelings of love and forgiveness. You have been listening to Amish Breaking Point. The next book in the Amish Secret Widows Society series is Book 8, Plain Murder.